Good evening. By my computer, it is 4:15, and we're going to bring this regularly scheduled Seattle School District Board legislative meeting to order. And before we begin, we want to recognize and honor the First Peoples of the Puget Sound Territories by acknowledging that we are on the land of the Coast Salish tribes. Additionally, I would like to welcome Rhea DeLaura, who is joining us on the dais this evening as a student from Chief Sealth International High School. She'll have a chance to give comments later in the meeting. Thank you for being here. Roll call, please.
Director Geary?
Here.
Director Hersey?
Here.
Director Burke?
Here.
Director Harris?
Here.
Director Pinkham?
Here.
Director Mack?
Here. And Director DeWolf is currently out of the country on vacation. For those of you all that wish to, please stand for the Pledge of Allegiance. Madam Superintendent, the floor is yours.
TV's off.
Perfect.
Thank you.
All right, thank you, President Harris. Now it's not working. How do you turn it on? We're very high tech here. Well, how about those Mariners?
Next. Next.
Thank you. Nope. Oh, there we go. All right, so just to begin, I just always want to remind us of our strategic plan priorities, so to ground our conversations as much as possible, and our intentionality and focus on these three initiatives for our targeted universalism goal of African American boys and students furthest from educational justice. And so those are third grade reading, welcoming environments, culturally responsive professional practice is what we'll be focusing on this year. And as we begin to talk about my school visits, I just want to say that October is National Principals Month, and I was really fortunate yesterday to sit with all of our principals at their Leadership Learning Day to thank them in person for the school leadership they provide across this district, the hard work that they put in to make sure our educators feel supported and that quality learning is going on in our schools. And so thank you, principals, for all the work that you do. So I have visited 2 schools so far for a deep dive into the work that they are doing. Emerson staff is getting to know each student as a reader so they can work in partnership with students and families. Principal Rasmussen showed me the PBIS content that staff created and the work that happens in the SOAR block. These Eagles are building reading stamina in students, teaching the processes for group work, modeling brave spelling, and assessing students so they know each student's strength and need. The classroom is the center. In the center of the picture is our fourth graders talking on big topics like farm workers' rights and racism. It was pretty phenomenal to be in that classroom when they were reading texts about organizing and activism. The teacher sort of leading them in conversation about working together in teams and what does that mean to be a community builder. He talked to them about that they were community builders and leaders, and then they took on those roles. And then they had really robust conversations. And the group that I talked to was actually talking about the topic of racism and what that meant to them. And for fourth graders to be diving into that kind of content, it just continually reminds me that they are ready for those conversations and ready to be leaders in those conversations. Some of the things that they shared when they were talking about how they can work together were things like one person can't take up the whole time, so that we can all talk and we work together to get a solution for what the teacher asked us. And the two pictures on the right are from one classroom in Emerson. There are also two other small groups of students working with an adult on different reading strategies that are not pictured. But the staff at Emerson, they're committed to keeping all students in class for Tier 1 reading instruction and using small groups to meet the diverse needs of each learner. One thing that's obvious when you enter the doors at John Muir Elementary is that Principal Ball Cuthbertson and her team find a great deal of joy in their work with students. The staff's intentional focus on African American boys was very evident in the hallways and in the classrooms. And as a result, students have had consistent growth in their academic performance scores. Principal Ball Cuthbertson and her team take pride in having staff that look like students and the families that they serve. John Muir is also a beneficiary of multiple Seattle teacher residency staff, and we know that these staff are well-versed in culturally responsive practices. So thankful for the UW and the Alliance for that partnership, and continue to see that effort pay off in our classrooms. One observation that I made as I visited classrooms was the tight alignment in both behavioral expectations and content standards. In 3 different classes, students were exploring the characteristics of igneous and sedimentary rocks. I thought back, I was like, did I get that lesson? I think I was in college when I talked about different type. No. They were using academic vocabulary to explain to each other their observations, as well as writing their observations in their science journals. And truly, when I was watching these teams work together, they were scientists in action. The staff at John Muir is very proud of the systems that they have created. These consistent expectations keep students in the classroom so they do not miss 1 minute of instruction. Stuck again. Oh, there we go. Anyway, the work of creating safe and welcoming environments is ongoing and visible in the classrooms that I visited these last 2 weeks. In classrooms, I heard adults say things like, as leaders and change makers, what does working together look like? These teachers chose to use powerful, compassionate words when referring to our learners. Pictured here is a first grade classroom at John Muir Elementary that's closing the day with circle time. They each sat in scholar mode and shared one thing that they enjoyed about the day. So I got to visit at the end of the day. Some of the things they said are, I enjoyed planning games in PE, I enjoyed the yummy food, and I enjoyed writing. I saw a similar closing in a first grade classroom at Emerson the week before. These are the signs in Emerson and John Muir that were honoring the land and the students' emotional feelings. And so just a lot of great work going on in our schools. Dr. Mia Williams is leading small cabinet in a book study. And as you can see, we are all very engaged in this work. In this session, each member of the team committed to actions to further the achievement of Black boys in our district. And here are a few of the commitments that were written down. I commit to engaging Black boys and young men voices, family, and CBO voices in our data gathering methodology. I commit to using an anti-racist lens in my work. I commit to holding myself and others to use affirming language and stop the use of deficit-based language. This is super powerful work for our senior leadership team. And I really want to thank Small Cabinet for opening up their practices, making themselves vulnerable in their leadership positions. And I just want to close with some pictures of the Black excellence that surrounds us. This super reader read some of his book to me and his favorite staff member at Emerson. the two brilliant robotics engineers were so enthusiastic in their learning. I asked one of them to promise me that she would never lose her joy for learning. So they were sitting in a robotics class, which is a benefit of the Amazon funding that we got. And so those are well underway, those programs and after-school programs. And they were just so excited to be having that extended learning that was going on. And it was so evident in our faces. And so I just asked her, please never lose your joy of learning. And this, the Franklin senior, Jaden Thomas, was just accepted to Benedict College. He introduced the mayor at her budget presentation at Franklin High School. He's a small business owner of Wonder Cupcakes by Jay. He's the dance team captain, chairman of the principal's cabinet at Franklin, senior class yearbook advisor, and a huge fan of Beyonce. So we just see the Black excellence all around us in Seattle schools, and it's up to us to make sure that we keep them front and center and make it visible. And so thank you, Madam President.
Thank you. We are at Roman 3, Board Committee Reports. Who would like to report out first? Director Mack, Chair of Operations, and on the Legislative Liaison. Thank you.
Good evening. On the legislative liaison work, I just got back from the WASDA Legislative Assembly, which is the statewide School Directors Association's legislative assembly. And I did send an email out to the school board directors sharing the full book of positions that were voted on. It's large, but it was actually a little more exciting than I expected it to be. Some great positions were passed that we were expecting to pass. But two things of note. One was that the previous position on pro-statewide bargaining actually came off and was referred back to the legislative committee. So the state school board association no longer has a position saying pro-statewide bargaining at this point. So that's interesting. And there's also an emergency proposal that came forward from 5 different districts for the review and revision of the prototypical school funding model. And that's the funding model that provides allocations for staffing, which is sorely needing. It is very low on nurses, counselors, social workers, et cetera. And it hasn't actually been changed in 10 years. And so this position, which passed, I proposed an amendment myself to add additional language, not to just reflect mental health and special ed, but also English language learners, opportunity gap closing services, and safety and security, I believe, which is part of the position there. So that was very exciting that that'll be something that comes forward in advocacy from a statewide level. The state organization then takes what was voted on by the members and it gets ranked, and their actual one pager will come out in about a month or so, which I'll share when that comes. Our Seattle Public Schools legislative platform, we adopt one every year for state and federal, and that's been in draft form. We've been working on it, considering all the other positions and organizations as well. And it'll be coming to the executive committee on October 10th, if you're interested in being present to hear that and see that draft, and then it'll eventually come to the full board for approval. And opportunity for revisions to it in the meantime with input from the board. So excited to get that work moving forward so that we can advocate effectively with our state legislators. With ops, we haven't had a meeting since last board meeting. We do tomorrow, 4:30, next door, open public meeting, welcome to come and sit in. We don't take public comment, and it is a very full agenda. We will be getting a report from the BEX and BTA Oversight Committee about their work, as well as I understand they have some recommendations to the board on a couple of different policy things, so we'll be hearing about that. One of the board action reports that's coming is the approval of the Orca Cards contract with the city, I think it is. And the big one is student assignment transition plan and boundaries. There's a lot of stuff in there. We had a work session last week, Wednesday, where we, as a board, discussed a lot of the proposals in there. We'll be further discussing those recommendations, and those, just to highlight what some of them are, is it proposed geozone changes for McDonald and John Stanford, the highly capable cohort at Washington and the TAF, how that intersects there, the removal of the spectrum tiebreaker, and Licton Springs at the new Webster building, moving to the new Webster building. For the boundary changes, the maps are now available for the suggested changes for the southeast, which will impact Maple, Rising Star at African American Academy, Wing Luke, Kimball, and Dearborn Park. So 5 schools are going to be impacted by those recommended changes. And I understand there's been some working groups from the communities working on those. They've had some community meetings, and so we'll be learning more in depth about that tomorrow. And we'll also be talking about the policy H13, which is our capacity management policy, and kind of cross-referencing it with 4 other policies that intersect with building usage, so we can kind of understand that, as well as the start of school enrollment projection planning process. So that'll be a fun discussion. I think it will be. I don't know about my fellow board directors, but I'm excited about it. And then just a heads up, coming down the line in December, on December 4th, will be a work session on the BEX 5 implementation plan. So if you're interested in that, that'll be happening in a bit. Thank you.
Director Geary, please. Thank you.
Okay, I am going to be reporting on Curriculum and Instruction Policy Committee meeting. Our next meeting is October 8th. The board action report item that will be coming and discussed is going to be the modifications to the Highly Capable Services Policy 2190. I know that that's of great interest to our community. We are getting lots of emails about the highly capable cohort and some of the proposals that are being made with regard to restructuring it. So that is probably the most, the board action report item that is of the most interest, but we will also be doing approval of the 2019-20 District Educational Research and Program Evaluation Plan, which is also, I think, usually of great interest in terms of the deeper dive. I think that the public often says, you know, what evidence do you have that this is or is not working? How are you going to make sure that you're going to do that across the district? And we don't have the resources always to do that deep dive. So this is our opportunity to shape that and look more closely into our programs in a really data-based way. I'm going to be presenting a draft of the anti-racist policy that has been circulating in the district now, getting some input from the staff. It's my hope then to start the discussion on how to do a robust community engagement. I mean, that is a big change. It's been my surprise to find that there aren't a lot of those policies with regard to education across the country, and so this is an opportunity to really, once again, do something that could set the stage for a lot of other school districts. So we want to do that well, and we want to engage our public, so that's not a quick conversation. So I'm happy to hear from people on the kind of public engagement they think it merits. Then our standing agenda items, we have instructional materials, and you will see tonight an introduction that we are bringing the modifications to 2015, the adoption of instructional material policy, and this was a necessary piece. That will be a necessary piece for us to get to the adoption of ethnic studies. And so it's very exciting that we're moving forward on that, and that we will then be able to move more quickly and robustly with regard to getting an ethnic studies adoption going. And we've been working a long time on that, and we'll talk a little bit more about that later. So those are probably the highlights of the Curriculum and Instruction Policy Committee meeting, and anybody is welcome to attend. Again, that's October 8th.
Director Pinkham, Chair of Audit and Finance.
Kasia, thank you. Our next ANF meeting will be the day before the CNI on Monday, October 7th, and we have 3 bar items to cover that day. The first one is going to be the State Auditor's Office contract, which is an annual requirement, so we have to get that done. There's also a renewal of the Microsoft software agreement to make sure we have those resources for our students and staff and other employees of the school district. The third one deals with the new healthcare system. So we'll have a bar on the benefits contract to discuss. So if people are interested in hearing what's discussed on those issues, please attend. Special attention items include contracts exceeding $250K for our special education needs, follow-up on the Thornton Creek, an MOU policy follow-up, the community eligibility program, follow up with the United Way breakfast. We want to see, kind of what happened there, get an update as to why and maybe how we can continue that program. The fiber credit will be discussed. The SAP, Human Resources and Payroll Services, a fairly new system for us, and having the staff that we have to make sure that things are going well. I also have an update on the operations levy certification from our chief financial officer that day. And other items just are included in our annual committee work plan. And notice that we do have the December 3rd quarterly audit meeting coming up, which Andrew and I were kind of confused as to who was going to be there. If our official day on the board for those not running for the office again is going to be that oath of office the day before, who's going to jump in the next day. So we'll be following that, get some clarification on that. Also, Andrew Medina will be doing his annual report to the board, I believe either later this month or in November. And he's asked that when he does that, that it be part of the board committee reports versus a separate item. So he'll just follow up with me on that. And that is the report from ANF. Thank you very much.
Okay, and when he does that report, if we could call it out in the agenda, be grateful for that. Absolutely happy to meld it in with the ANF, but it should be line itemed on the agenda. The next executive committee is, I believe, October 9th. Director Mack, I think you said the 10th. Want to make sure that it's the 9th? It is the 10th. It's on Thursday. Well, and there you go. And that's why this is a team. Thank you. Scheduled for that, again, it's a public meeting. It's at 8 a.m. until 10 a.m. And we will be hearing about our legislative agenda from Eden and Jill, and from our very capable staff as well. Our lobbyist will not be here because he's traveling, but it's an important conversation, and it's a short conversation because of how much we have to pack into 2 hours. And as we wrestle over the agenda items, it's a push me, pull you for sure. Okay, we're also going to be discussing potentially raises for non-represented staff. And we're also going to keep on the the executive committee's agenda, reconfiguring these legislative meetings, whether we start them later, whether we set aside some of the public testimony slots for particular issues such as race and equity or strat plan issues, continuing important issues that if they are not on the agenda, they're still going to be addressed on a regular basis. This has been from strong community input. And hopefully by the next legislative meeting, we will have, as I referred to at the last legislative meeting, a new bar that addresses the legal requirements for First Amendment rights in public testimony. And I see Chief Counsel Narver. You want to wave, please, so folks know who you are? Started on September 3rd. Agreeing with me there, so that we are in conformance with state and federal law. Still talking about board and staff communication. And They are very intense and very quick-moving meetings, and we have standing items, community engagement, communications, strat plan updates, etc. And you are more than welcome to attend. Next, we come to student comments. And I get to read a little bit about you, and then the floor will be yours. And I might add that you can stay as long as you like. You don't get to vote, but you get to ask questions from the dais as if you were a board member. So, Ms. DeLaura is a junior at Chief South International High School and enrolled in the full IB diploma program. She also participates in mock trial, band, and other extracurricular activities. And since I live 2 blocks away from Chief South International High School, my brothers and sisters all went there, and my daughter graduated there. Welcome, go Seahawks.
Hi, my name is Ria DeLaura. So I've been going to Chief South for 2 years. This is my 3rd year. As she said, I'm a junior, and I can confidently say sitting up here that I am proud to be a Seahawk. Chief South boasts one of the most diverse and engaged student bodies in the entire district, and watching my peers and classmates and people that I see on a daily basis taking the steps to develop their skills and their education is really inspiring every day. So Chief South pioneered the Sakashi program for Indigenous students to explore, understand, and share their culture. Both of my brothers are in the Sakashi program, and many other students that I've spoken to really find enrichment from getting to spend time with other Native students who maybe haven't been able to explore their culture as much. South is also one of only 3 schools in the district that offers the IB program. So that's a rigorous 2-year course that allows students to really explore what it means to be an academic and what it means to learn and what it means to grow. And I've only just begun the IB program, but I've taken previous IB classes, and I can say that I really feel that what I'm doing now at school, going to high school every morning, is going to set me up for success, and that I'm given the opportunities to go down the path that will lead me to have a better life later. South also offers multiple academic extracurriculars or extracurriculars that are geared towards learning, including mock trial, which I'm in, ethics bowl, feast, green team, key club, and many others. Alongside the extracurriculars, South also has a very consistent and persistent music program. So we have ensembles such as our concert and our marching band, our orchestra, our choir, our mariachi band, and our jazz band, which has inspired many students to form their own smaller groups to explore the music they want to be playing and they want to be hearing and they want to share with other people. So throughout my time at Chief South, I've met some of the brightest, most inspiring, most engaged and passionate people I think I ever will. Even though there's a lot of financial issues and a lot of students just aren't on the same, they haven't been given the same opportunities because of the families they were born in, the areas they live in. Given the opportunity, no matter what student you have in front of you, if you give them something that they can be passionate about and love, everybody's gonna find something to do. And South really gives the opportunity for so many different students in so many different areas of learning and expertise, and everybody to make their own choices and to come on their own paths. Go Seahawks.
Thank you for that. Watch out, Franklin. Chief South International High School's mock trial team's coming for you. Directors, do you have questions, comments for our guest? Director Pinkham, please.
Welcome, Ria. My question is going to be about, what are your plans after high school? Do you know what you're doing? And do you have a tribal affiliation? Just curious.
Yeah, so my dad was Native, and he was in the Brothertown Indian tribe in the Dakota area, so me and my brothers are all registered under that tribe, but we don't connect very much with it because we live with members of the family on my other side of the family, my white side of the family. For me, college and four-year university has never really been an option. It's something that was almost expected, and as I've grown and understood like what learning and knowledge means to me, it's like I feel nothing but the desire to go to a four-year university. And I would love to work in an area such as like curation for like art and history, because I'm really passionate about understanding our roots and understanding where we come from. And math. I like math a lot. Yeah, math is my thing.
Expect to see your application to the University of Washington then.
We'll see.
Catch this man at break, because he is a mentor to a great many University of Washington students at the university in the College of Engineering, and also works with the native programs there as well. And when you hire Scott as your mentor, you get him for life. Other directors, comments, questions, concerns? Well then, thank you. Please
Thank you.
continue to stay if you'd like. And if you have homework, we understand.
Thank you.
So we are at board members' reports out. Who would like to go first? Go, Director Burke.
Good evening. I will we'll lead off this comments thing. I've got a few things prepared. It's only been 2 weeks since we were last together. Much has happened, but 2 weeks ago, we nominated this gentleman, which I'm proud to sit next to. So it's going to be tough to one up that for this meeting. I don't think we can, but that was super exciting, and all the conversations we've had since then just reassure me that he's going to be a great colleague and a great representative for D7 and for the city. Some other things, we had a couple of work sessions on advanced learning and student assignment transition plan. I'll touch on those issues a little bit more specifically. One of our partners, the Port of Seattle, hosted an event. There was their Maritime Secondary Education Summit, and I'm not sure if other directors want to expand on this. I had the pleasure of joining Director Mack and Director Geary. This has been an area of passion, the intersection of career and technical education and our maritime region, and our partnership with the Port of Seattle. And they're really trying to explore what are the possibilities, what do funding models look like, what do partnerships look like. So it was a really great event. I was only able to be there for the first half of the day. I think my colleagues were able to stay longer. I was thrilled to be able to attend that. We had a board retreat and got to do a deep dive into our strategic plan. And I'm really, really thrilled about where our strategic plan has come from, how it's evolved, and what it looks like now. The messaging around it, the branding around it, the enthusiasm around it, the initiatives within it, I think are really strong, and I want to commend Superintendent Juneau and staff for putting that together. Some of my reflections from that retreat, when we were talking about Seattle excellence, I have an internal belief or opinion or sort of a learned experience of, in my mind, what that looks like. What does Seattle excellence look like for me, for my family? And the conversations we had there and the conversations around Black excellence were really eye-opening and mind-opening. And Superintendent Juneau mentioned some of that in her opening comments as well. And I just want to encourage all of us to keep having those conversations about how do we define excellence, not so much to put it in a box, but to open each other's minds. Because I confess to coming into the conversation with a particular perspective, and that makes it really difficult to implement policy work and decisions when you're coming from a limited mindset. So how do we define it? How are we measuring excellence? Because the measurement of excellence, we need to be putting our racial equity lens on this. We need to be making sure that we're really sensitive to other cultural viewpoints. What tools or processes do we use to measure? And then how do we celebrate, motivate, and develop excellence in our students. And I think that was like the real nut that came out of it. Is like, yeah, we want this excellence. We have to agree what it is in all its different forms, and figure out how to get our students there and celebrate when they're there. Other topics. I think there's some conversation around nutrition services, and I want to apologize to any of our families that have had less than satisfactory experiences with nutrition services. I think we've put in our strategic plan an intent for consistent and predictable operational systems. We think about our transportation, we think about our nutrition services. These are bedrock items that we should deliver. They should be reliable, and I know that staff is working to make sure we get that right. We don't want problems like that to become recurring. So apologies, and thank you for your patience. One of the topics that came up at our work session around the student assignment transition plan, I want to be very, very clear that we have a really challenging decision or choice that we're looking at that is not particularly desirable in any way. We have overcrowding at we have overcrowding at Green Lake Elementary, and if we increase the geozones for McDonald and John Stanford, we may alleviate that overcrowding slightly. So that's a potential positive. But really what we should be doing, if we're following our equity commitment, is we should be shrinking those geozones, and we should be increasing our set aside for heritage speakers at those schools to celebrate the diversity and help those programs thrive, support more students farthest from educational justice. The challenge is, if we do that, we are going to hurt Green Lake Elementary in a big way without another fix. So I'm confess that as a director, I'm really struggling with how to move forward on that, and so I really appreciate hearing from community about pros and cons of the different areas. The last one I'm going to touch on is highly capable services and advanced learning. This was also a rich discussion that we had at our work session on this topic. And I think it's really clear that it's a highly racially unbalanced program. That is, and so I think the questions, there's so many questions around that, the whys, the what do we do about it, do we balance it, or do we restructure it? Is it actually serving students, or is it just perpetuating stereotypes? And the point that I brought up at that work session that I want to reiterate here is that yes, that is important, that is work we have to do, but I do not believe that that is our immediate moral imperative. I believe that our immediate moral imperative is our students farthest from educational justice, and the ones that we're talking about serving through the multi-tiered systems of support that we've been working on. You know, this is a policy that we put in place in 2011. We have funded it, we have committed to it, staff has been working on it, we're doing professional development around it, we made a SMART goal around it. This has been and should be the mechanism to support our students in schools, both when they're below proficiency and when they're above grade level proficiency. That's the structure that we're talking about as a vehicle. And so I think it's incumbent on us as a district to prove to our families that that system works, that it can work, that it does work, and that we have the ability to implement that across the district. Because that will provide the confidence to our families that are looking for services at all levels. So the fix for advanced learning is really to fix our core instruction, because we've got such a wide range of students that we're asking our educators to differentiate. It's really hard for, say, a third grade teacher to provide effective learning environments for a student that's still learning to decompose numbers into single digits, and in the same class, students that are doing operations with fractions. It's not fair to the educator, it's not fair to the students, And so we have to figure out how to close that gap, how to get our students at proficiency and not have that level of differentiation needed in the classrooms. That's core instruction. That's what core instruction will do and can do. To close that topic and to talk about why it's such an imperative, we've talked about our third grade reading goal for African American boys. Office of Superintendent of Public Instruction has data that they maintain for Black African American. It doesn't isolate boys and girls. That's a deeper granularity than what you can just get off the website. But OSPI data from 5 years ago had 28% of our third grade African American students meeting proficiency in reading. 28%. In 5 years, that number has increased to 38%. It's an increase, but it's unacceptable. We have a strategic initiative that is absolutely focused on that, and I believe it will drive that improvement. But I want to throw another stark data point out there. 5 years ago, 25% of our African American students were meeting math proficiency. What is that number today, 5 years later? It's 27%. 3/4 of our African American students in third grade are not at math proficiency. And so we're letting these students down. So my ask is that we focus on those students, we focus on the MTSS structure, and we demonstrate that we can bring those students farthest from educational justice, from where they are, from where they've been historically, to where they are knocking it out of the park. Last thing, community meetings. I have 2, one October 12th. Greenwood Public Library. Director DeWolf has indicated he will likely be there. I want to let him confirm that, but I believe October 12th, 10 o'clock, Greenwood will be a twofer. And then my last meeting of my term will be November 9th, also Greenwood Library, 3 to 5 p.m. Thank you very much.
With Chief Counsel, I put board members reporting out before consent agenda. I'm okay with that, aren't I? Thank you, sir. Next up, please. Director Hersey. Thank you.
Hello. Okay, fantastic. First up, thank you so much for all of the warm welcomes, both in person and via my inbox. I really, really appreciate it. We have definitely hit the ground running. I have spent probably the last 4 hours for the last, 8 or 9 nights meeting with different chiefs in the cabinet, and I have learned and continue to learn so much about all of the amazing work that our district is doing, and even beyond that, all of the amazing work we're going to continue to do, and I'm excited to be a part of. I wanted to extend a thank you to Director Harris for inviting me to her community meeting. It was wonderful to have conversation around advanced learning and boundaries, and the lasagna smelled great, even though I could not partake. And I am excited to continue to do those community meetings for myself moving forward. And I've got a couple that I'm going to announce a little bit later on in the comments. Something that I'm really excited about is a few families have reached out concerning the boundary changes that are going to be affecting the Southeast as the aforementioned elementary schools earlier in the comments. And if you would be interested in walking some of those proposed routes, I know that I have a time set up with a family this Friday. But if you would like to get a chance to have a conversation so that I can walk the route with you and your family or maybe some other community members, I would be more than happy to take the time to do that. Just shoot me an email and we will find a time to connect, just so that I can get a better idea of what those changes mean for you and yours. And it would also be a cool opportunity to meet some of your kiddos and have some deeper conversations about, what this is going to look like for your families. So 2 community meetings that are coming up. A big one focused around boundaries is going to be happening on October 10th from 6:30 to 8:30 at Mercer Middle School. I unfortunately will not be able to join in person. I will be at my sister's wedding. but I will be joining electronically from Atlanta, Georgia. It'll be a late night, but I think that it is important for me to be present. And I think that we're also going to be looking at opportunities to set up an additional meeting to get more feedback. And so those are still in the works, so be on the lookout for those. My personal my personal community meetings. I've got 2 on the calendar, and I'm going to be committing to 2 or 3 community meetings a month going forward, just so that I can do everything I possibly can to meet everyone who would like to come out and share their thoughts and opinions and ideas and things like that. So the first 2 I've got set up. The first one is going to be at the Beacon Hill Library on Sunday. That is going to be October 20th from 3:30 to 4:30. Hopefully they'll let us stay a little longer. It's surprisingly difficult to book community meetings a couple of weeks in advance, which is great because I'm glad that folks are using our libraries to their full capacities, but it is also difficult to find public meeting space. So we're going to be looking out some more creative options. And then the next meeting is going to be at Rainier Beach Library on October 31st. And I know that's Halloween. We're going to have candy. So come through if you would like. And that's going to be from 6 to 7:30 p.m. Like I said, I want to commit to having a diversity of community meetings and a diversity of locations, both on the weekend and on a weekday at different times of day. I want to make myself as available as possible. So please, if you have an idea for times that work best for you or a location that is public and large, don't hesitate to email me. My email is up and running, and you can find that on the website. The next piece was I really enjoyed getting to spend some time with the NAACP Seattle King County chapter that met here at the John Stanford Center last week. It was really great. Superintendent Juneau joined us along with Dr. Mia Williams and a few other members from the cabinet. And it was just really amazing to see and get a lot of ideas around how we can continue to partner with an organization like the NAACP, especially when we're thinking about, the goals that we've set for ourselves in our strategic plan. I really see those community partnerships as being crucial going forward and continuing to build those relationships and to unsilo our learning and, connect on those deeper levels is going to be something that I'm going to be excited to be a part of. And I hope to see some of my fellow board directors at a few of those meetings going forward. Next up, the board retreat was amazing. It was so much fun to get to spend some time learning more deeply about the work that is going on in our district, and I'm just excited to continue that. So thank you for all of those who were present, and thank you very much. I believe it was the Meany Drumline, that BWB Meany Drumline. They're amazing. However, we can continue to support and uplift and showcase their work. Definitely interested in doing that. Also had the wonderful opportunity to attend a family engagement event at South Shore. I was invited by, again, Dr. Mia Williams and Dr. Keisha Scarlett. Those spaces are so much fun to be a part of because you just leave feeling uplifted. And, it was such an amazing event that was done in partnership with Rainier Scholars. And I actually learned a lot of things that I took back to my classroom the next day, and it has improved my instruction. So not only things that you can use at home, but also things that can be used in the classroom and vice versa. I believe strongly the more we break down those barriers between home and school, the more amazing outcomes we're going to see for our kids. And that about wraps it up for me. Like I said, please, if you have any questions, comments, concerns, do not hesitate to email me, and I look forward to continuing to connect with our community and to get it done for kids. Thanks so much.
Director Geary.
To round out this side of the dais, just doing boom, boom, boom. I, too, attended the Maritime Secondary Education Summit with Directors Burke and Mack. Huge appreciation to Port Commissioner Ryan Calkins, who has been, I think, fascinated and really enthusiastic about how to combine the port's resources with Seattle Public Schools to create exciting education options for our kids. And I think it was, for me, a really eye-opening experience to bring in so many of the different groups in Maritime outside of education and see them interact with the people who work in education and see that the culture shifts that we've worked so hard to create within Seattle Public Schools definitely need to take place within our partners as well, and to see the exposure to some of the ideas that we take for granted was fascinating. To see different people from different groups stand up, be it the longshoremen or people in education or students of color who have gone through the program and talk about their expectations, the changes in the industry, the changes in the apprenticeship programs, culture differences. And to see that conversation start was super exciting for me, because it's going to be a really important conversation that if you want people to show up, you need to think about what's going to make a warm and welcoming environment for them. And that looks really different, perhaps, from the historically union setting as to what tomorrow's union setting has to look like, and what the students need. And one of the most interesting comments that was made was by a young man, and who said, you know, in my community, it can't be about delayed gratification. And that doesn't, for a lot of us, I think that sounds like, oh, well, that's the cornerstone of hard work, and you have to work hard and hope for a reward down the line. But then he followed it up with something that was really important for me to hear, and I think for a lot of people in the room to hear, and that was that when you go home and the lights are being turned off, or you've got to figure out where your next meals come from, or the problems of your day-to-day life are immediate. And so delaying gratification, you can't wait, because you'll be gone, you'll be homeless, you'll have to move. So that we have to think about what it is that the kids that we want to reach need now in order to stay engaged. And that if we're setting up systems that assume that they have the stability and the base to wait for a payoff at some point in the future, that we may be losing them and then turning around and making a judgment call as to them that just isn't fair. And it was a really great comment to think about in that context. And so it is those culture shifts that are going to need to take place for us to create even the warm and welcoming environments within our own school district. So I'm just going to tie it in with another theme that I've been seeing more and more in just these conversations, and that is the idea of discomfort. And so when we see those moments where our assumptions are being challenged, and what we took as sort of the truths, the rights, the norms, are being dismantled by people, it's going to feel uncomfortable, and that's okay. That has to happen for this change to happen. So be sure when you feel the discomfort within these conversations, don't hide, don't back away, don't necessarily become defensive. Live with it, and you'll see that you survive, and that the next time you're in a situation, you might find that it doesn't feel as discomforting, and that your perspective has changed. So those are the thoughts that I've been coming up with in so many of these conversations and places that I've had the opportunity to go into. Today I got to attend the Seattle Arts and Lectures Luncheon to support the WITS program, which is Writers in the Schools. And I was very embarrassed when asked, "Did you know about this program?" And I said no, because we have so many programs and so many partners. They don't necessarily play as prominent a role in the schools in my district, but they are there. And it was with great pleasure that I got to meet Wei Wei Lee, who is a student at Nathan Hale High School, who is the 2019-20 Poet Laureate for Seattle. And so there's just such great work going on, and it was my honor to get to meet her. It was my honor to support that program. And it did make me remember that there was a time when we would bring in our partners on a regular basis, and they would tell us a little bit about their programs during our meetings. I think that that's an incredibly helpful thing to the members of the board to know what different programs and what different partners are, and get to share the good news, the good work that we have going on in our schools. And I don't, we're not doing that as much anymore, and I think I missed it, and I hadn't realized it was gone until that moment. I continue to have my breakfast coffees at Zoka on Blakely behind the University Village. The next one will be October 8th, next Tuesday morning, and then the one after that is going to be October 29th, because I have engagements in the middle of the month. But they're 8 to 9:30. We always have a group of people who are pretty well versed in education in Seattle Public Schools, so it's a great time to just talk education and drink some coffee. Thanks.
You. Who would like to go next? Director Pinkham, please.
Todd Sklowit, good evening and thank you. Sorry I missed the board retreat. I had actually the honor to deliver the eulogy for my father-in-law as they spread his ashes out in the sea out on the Oregon coast. So, although I wasn't at the meeting, I'm glad to hear that you did some fantastic things, or you feel that things went right. The Advanced Learning Task Force, appreciate what they're doing and what you'll continue to do, because I do see that we still need some things to do, and hopefully as we go through this process we'll be able to make some strides that we've been missing. I do want to see more of our underserved students getting identified as HCC or advanced learning, and how we do that. Sometimes we can't just keep on trying to retest. Maybe it's a test that isn't doing us service. And this kind of brought me to thinking about the idea where I'm at the University of Washington College of Engineering. We're trying to get away from are students ready for college? It's more, is the college ready for students? So we are definitely looking at the lens of how we define success for our students a lot differently these days. And I think as we look at what our goals, and we say that we want to make sure our students are college and career ready, I just want to make sure that they're successful. And that success is going to be defined separately by each student, each family, each community, what's going to make them successful. Which brought me back to, if I can bring this up here, excuse me. Computer went to sleep. What I brought up at the last meeting, and I wanted to read this quote from, again, this is William Wolf, who is a former president of the National Academy of Engineers, and he's looking at engineering, and where I say engineering, you can put in education, so please bear with me. And he says, many people talk about the need for diversity as an issue of equity in terms of fairness, and that is a potent argument. Americans are very sensitive to issues of equity and fairness, so the fairness argument resonates with many people. But I will make a different argument today. A second argument for diversity has to do with numbers. The fact that white males are becoming a minority in the population of the United States, and that unless we include more women and underrepresented minorities in the engineering workforce, we're simply not going to have the number of engineers we need to continue to enjoy the wonderful lifestyle we've had for the last century or so. This too is a potent argument, but is not the one I'm going to present today. My argument is essentially that the quality of engineering is affected by diversity or the lack of it. To make that argument, I'm going to share with you some of the very deep beliefs about the nature of engineering, some of which run counter to stereotypes of engineers and engineering. The whole argument in a nutshell is this. It hinges on the notion that engineering is a profoundly creative profession. Not the stereotype I know, but something I believe deeply. The psychological literature tells us that creativity is not something that just happens. It is all about making unexpected connections between things we already know. Hence, creativity depends on our life experiences. Without diversity, the life experiences that bring to an engineering problem are limited. As a consequence, we may not find the best engineering solution. We may not find the elegant engineering solution. So the more voices we include at the table, the better solutions we'll find. I also want to make announcements. UNEA is having some restorative justice workshops this weekend. The first one is on Saturday at the Green Lake Library from 11 to 4. And they did secure a second spot to do it on Sunday from 12 to 4 at Howler Lake Community Club. This is for ages 12 and up. There are Native Warriors Athletics, ages 9 to 14, will be on Sunday as well, October 6th from 6 to 8 p.m. They're also having the debut of their Linked Springs documentary toward the end of the month on October 26th from 1 to 3 at the Seattle Central Library. So I'd encourage people to go out and participate in what UNA has to offer. And also want to announce that Hitchusita PAC elections are also going to be on October 17th from 5 to 6:30 at Meany Middle School. So for those that have 506 form students enrolled in schools, please head out there and make your voices heard. I will have community meetings this month, October 19th from 10:30 to noon at the Lake City Library. And then my last one will be November 16th, also from 10:30 to noon, in just District 2, Rick Brooks area at the Greenwood Library. And those times are posted on the district website. Katsiayo, thank you.
Thank you. Director Mack, please.
Since I gave such a long committee report, I'm going to try to be relatively brief since we're going to run into community comments, and I really like hearing from the community. And so first off, I have a community meeting on the 19th from 11 to noon at Magnolia Public Library. I hope to see you there. Everyone is welcome. You don't have to be just from my district. I'm happy to, I am very interested in hearing other perspectives as well, not just from the district. Congrats to the principals on Principal Month. Thank you for mentioning that, Superintendent Juneau. I also appreciated hearing the comment from the student that was, I think you said it was part of their PBIS work, which the acronym, just for folks that don't know, that's Positive Behavior Intervention Supports, and it's a program to support communities and students in being productive and have great cultures and be positive. And so I really liked hearing the work together and let everyone speak part. I think that's just really meaningful, and I think that's something that as we move forward into our challenging discussions around how to solve some of our hardest problems, that we need to remember that, that it's important to let people speak, respect them, even if you don't agree with them, and that we need to be working together to come to these solutions. You know, reiterating the safe and welcoming environments, you know, I want that for our district. I want everyone to feel welcome and that their voices are being heard, and I just want to, I'm glad that we are continuing that commitment. The board retreat, it really was fun to have the drumming. Let's see here. Thank you for mentioning the Maritime Academy. I'm sorry if I'm forgetting the name of the day-long stakeholders group. Right, but it really was great to have all of these people in the room that are really interested in bringing together thoughts and resources to do something to support the maritime industry, as well as support students in maritime, as well as support our CTE. And you know, one of the things that I learned, which was really interesting, was that came up was that CTE courses actually are advanced courses in some cases. Like, you need to be taking advanced math to be doing some of the courses, and it was just really wonderful to realize that we actually have all of these additional advanced learning opportunities that we need to be tying into all of our programs, and that I think we need to explore that further, especially at high school. And I also found it really interesting that, in general, the word cohort program came up a number of times in support of the concept. And it's interesting to think about that and the impact that can have on a system. And what does a cohort mean? And how do you create that in a racially equitable manner? Or do you have, can you run into issues with that? And I think we can. So it's an interesting conversation. Let's see here. So I think that was all of the little things I noted down to talk about. And I look forward to hearing from all of you tonight. Thank you.
Okay, thanks for being here. very much. Last Saturday was fun. Director Hersey, and it was nice having you right alongside. And I'm sorry you didn't get the lasagna. No carbs for you. Next time you have to tell me these things. And if any of the vegans had shown up, I'd have made you a separate one. But that's not the issue. My next community meetings are October 19th, 3 to 5, High Point Library. That's 35th Avenue Southwest and Southwest Raymond Street. And November 16th, 3 to 5 at the Delridge Library. The BWB Meany Middle School drum line and the exercises on that, and with some of our staff that participated, was a blast, and I nominate that for probably the most fun icebreaker, and I fulfilled one of my fantasies. Okay. Great conversation was had on the strat plan, and it's unusual to have all of us together in jeans with some time to talk about how we get there from here. And it's a luxury, frankly, with everyone's schedules. And it was nice to dig deeper to get there. I am most interested as well as per usual in getting more of the fiscal impacts of all of the different pieces to the puzzle, because there are ever so many of them. Advanced learning, great work session on Wednesday night, and what it said to me is just how much farther we have to go. I continue to be distressed that for 20 years we have done testing that is culturally inappropriate at best. We have not tested single domain learners. We have not figured out ways to meet the needs of twice exceptional children that are ever so talented but also need special ed support. And that's on us, and it's also on the lack of money. But I am very excited to see the deep dive that's being made. I am extraordinarily grateful for staff's work in putting together that notebook that has research, and I suspect that Director Geary had a lot to do with that as well, and I appreciate it. Thank you very much. I always go back to public television and the kids shows and the commercials to read more about it, and now we hit a website link, but to be able to take home peer-reviewed literature is hugely helpful. Also was pleased to attend most of the meeting on Monday afternoon at Washington Middle School with Superintendent Juneau, Special Advisor Sherry Cox, Chief HR Officer Clover Codd, and Director Sarah Pritchett to speak with the staff about the potential of the Technology Access Foundation coming to Washington Middle School. There's been a great deal of information swirling about, and I believe this might have been the first time that they had an opportunity to answer questions in a safe space. And the TAF team, and it's always easy to go to a fallback position and talk about Trish Tizikos-Molinas, but it's not just Trish Tiziko-Molinas, it's the TAF team, and she had her top folks there as well. And it was a productive conversation, and there are things to work out. SEA attended as well, and there was good, thoughtful, robust conversations, so stay tuned. The other piece of that, and both from my Saturday community meeting and a very high volume of emails, if we enter into a partnership with Technology Access Foundation, then we need a plan B, potentially, for pathways for the highly capable cohort for the South End. And every one of these problems, or I'd like to say opportunities, have enormous layers to them, And again, I wish that I had one of those Rubik's Cubes that I gave away to staff several years ago at our first retreat, because every time you move one element, you move 10 others, and that affects 10 others. I think of it as, I think it's the Hydra, where you cut one branch and 2 grow back, and then 4, etc. It's complicated. Hang with us. And when you give your feedback, please also give us constructive ideas, because we really, truly want to hear them. And now we're going to take a stretch break until 5:30, at which time public testimony will begin promptly. Time. Comments should be addressed to the board. Please adhere to the time limit. When you have, it's 2 minutes. When you have 30 seconds left, the yellow light will show, so start winding it down. When the red light comes in, please conclude your sentence. The majority of the speaker's time must be spent on the topic that you have indicated you wish to speak about. No racial slurs, personal insults, ridicule, or threats will be allowed. And all signs should adhere to the same. Please read 3 folks at a time so that you can set yourself up so we can make that elegant transition. Thank you so much.
First up for public testimony, we have Quan Nguyen, followed by Chris Jackins, and then Alex Zimmerman.
All right. Hello, my name is Tuan Nguyen, and I'm a junior at Chief South International High School. The first thing I would like to talk about is the funding in local high schools. Chief South is one of the most diverse schools in the Pacific Northwest, with many students coming from many backgrounds. Because of this, there are also many students who struggle with being on the same level of playfield on the more fortunate and wealthier families. On the other hand, in a place such as the West Seattle High School neighborhood, their income is generally higher, and as a result, West Seattle is able to receive more funding from their parents to their various departments. To offer a brief solution, PTAs over the SPS district could share the resources with other less fortunate schools as a step towards socioeconomic equity. I am part of the band program at Chief South and one of the captains on the mock trial team there. Both of these extracurriculars hold a very special place in my heart, as they were able to make me learn things in ways that differed from the normal academic schedule. Band opened up my creative pathway and allowed me to learn some music theory along, of course, how to play an instrument. Mock trial forced me to open up and talk in front of others and critically analyze texts and situations and many other pertinent skills. Most importantly, I've joined a community while partaking in both programs. Community is abundantly important in creating a group where you can feel comfortable is essential to a successful learning environment. These 2 activities alone, I believe, massively increased my growth as a scholar, so much more compared to what the normal high school schedule could have taught me. I understand that recently there has been a lot of pushback on funding for a multitude of things, but do realize that these programs provide a hope for low-income people, myself included. Even if the money situation is dire, the student still has something to look forward to and believe in. I know this because I'm still under that mindset where if I put in enough work, hours, and effort, I can make something happen for me and others. I truly believe in a future through the mock trial program and the band program, which opens up doors to career paths for me. extracurriculars serve as one of the best springboards to a student's career and into a life beyond high school. Thank you.
My name is Chris Jackins, Box 84063, Seattle 98124. On the Lafayette Elementary and Washington Middle School projects, both contracts state that interim contracts were already awarded to the same architect. Does this practice bias the awarding of the main contracts? On Loyal Heights final acceptance, 2 points. Number 1, the playground size has been dramatically reduced. Number 2, please adopt an amendment to require an explicit evaluation of impacts to playground space in the environmental review for all school construction projects. On the Northgate and Viewlands replacement projects, 2 points. Number 1, the reports list recent improvements for each school. What did these improvements cost, which are now proposed to be demolished? Number 2, the total project budget for Northgate Elementary is $90 million. Does it make sense for the district to rush forward during a high-cost period? On the personnel report, 2 points. Number 1, the report notes the departure of John Kroll, the district's chief information officer. I wish to thank Mr. Kroll for his work for the district. Number 2, one project that his department had looked at was restarting the publication of the district's annual data profile report. I would appreciate getting a copy of the report. On the school bus settlement agreement, 2 points. Number 1, in section H, there seem to be 2 points labeled number 8. Number 2, with regard to labor peace, if the company fails to comply, the district would no longer be able to seek damages. This would seem to reduce the leverage of the district and of bus drivers. Also, please reopen Indian Heritage High School and the African American Academy. Thank you. Welcome.
After Alex Zimmerman, we'll have Yvette Dinish, followed by Aaron Fish and Brad Saboko.
Зіхайл Адорі комбінації demo pig from Animal Farm. A fascist, a Gestapo, anti-Semite, and killer. My name Alex Zimmerman. You know, I speak about what's happening in this agenda because I come right now for a long time. You're talking about racism. You brainwash us children for many years. We don't have racism in Seattle right now. We have a fascism. It's a totally different. And fascism never have a color. Fascism can be to everybody. It's exactly what is you doing right now. You teach us children something, but you not open Pandora box, what is you supposed to be doing like a teacher. Why? I explain to you where is a problem we have. Where is black community right now in Seattle? Gone. Where is minority? Gone. Where is poor people? Gone. Where is senior citizen? Gone. 1,000 people dying. Why? Because we have a fascism when government together with corporations suck blood and money from us. And who did this for last few years? It's very interesting. 6 council, Seattle council is a color people. 6 women. You know what it means? Gonzalez violate constitutional law, Open Public Meeting Act 5 times. Nobody talking about this. Not touchable. They fascist. Is this exactly what I want to explain to you? When you don't teach us children about America, Constitution, freedom of speech, Open Public Act, and exactly what is America doing for everybody, and make everybody equal under Constitution, is exactly what has happened. This will be a big problem right now. If for another few years will be more and more and more problem. In everything what is right now, we need change. So stand up, America. We need bring Seattle back to normal life, what is we have before. Thank you very much.
Yvette Dinish, and I want to thank Alex Zimmerman because at least he's consistent, and I respect that. Yvette Dinish, this is my husband Tyrone Kinney. We're Rainier Beach aficionados, and so I was originally going to address the first student settlement agreement, but I think there's so much voices here today. I'm going to let them speak on that, but it got me thinking about the busing. and the fact that some kids that are homeless are being taxied to school. And that got me to thinking about the homeless situation and the number of kids that are homeless in the Seattle public school system. And one of my solutions would be, it may be too late now, but when you're doing capital building projects, to consider building affordable housing above the schools. As long as you got the school tore up or building, think about that. And that, because this is also number 14 on the agenda. Jody Old needed to be speaking about that. And so another reason why I'm concerned about the homeless is because there was an article in the Seattle Times the other day about how they're faring poorly because they're housing insecure. And when we went to a workshop last year with the Seattle Times about students not being able to do homework because they're homeless, and I brought that question up about, shouldn't that be a school issue? And they said, no, it's not. I totally disagree. That should be part of the conversation. This is an expert from out of town, so what does she know? But it needs to be considered when the housing insecure. And that brings me back to my Rainier Beach neighborhood, where it's one of the diverse zip codes in the country. The IB program, there's still some question about it's being funded. It bothers me, it kind of hurts my feelings when you talk about voices being heard, educational justice, racial equity and diversity, and Rainier Beach is still having to struggle and advocate to get their funding, and they were extremely successful about that. So put some action behind your words and see that they get properly funded at Rainier Beach High School. And thank you very much.
Hi, my name is Erin Fish. Thank you for allowing me to speak up. My son Declan is 4 years old, and in his short life, he has battled brain cancer twice. The harsh treatment and eight brain surgeries has left him with developmental delays, and he attends preschool with an IEP to get the services he needs. It's really hard to put a vulnerable preschool on our bus, but knowing he needs these services through Seattle Public Schools, I do so that I can also get to work to pay for the rest of his medical care. I put all of my trust in the transportation system that he's going to get to school on time to get the IEP services he needs and also to get there safely. This has not been the case for the past 2 years. In 2018, he attended Thurgood Marshall and the bus was either late or didn't show up for over 20 times. Therefore, he missed some critical IEP hours, and I missed work having to stay home with him or take him to school. This year, Declan is attending preschool at the EEU. We are into the second month of school, and his route still does not have a regular assigned driver. A different bus shows up at our house every day, sometimes with booster seats, sometimes not. They're usually scrambling to get them. And I put all of this aside until this past Monday, where Declan's bus hit another car on I-5. And there's a picture that Bao is holding up here. Sorry, I'm nervous. Declan's bus hit this car, and all I could think of was I haven't lost him to cancer yet, but a fear ensued in me that I could lose him to just getting to school from a bus crash. On Monday, I witnessed that bus driver driving erratically. She was late to our house by over 40 minutes and was not coherent when I was able to speak with her. She just said she didn't know how to put in the booster seats, which is why she was so late. She didn't see me and my entire family waving her down on the street and past our house quite a few times. I am just asking that the school district be committed to timely and safe transportation, and that we have a regular bus driver on these routes with proper safety seats for our preschoolers.
Brad? After Brad, we will have John Greenberg, followed by Carol Simmons, and then Amy Pace.
I'm told Brad's not here. That doesn't count, right? The time? Okay. Hello. I testified last June with the following thesis statement. We need to make racial equity work mandatory in Seattle Public Schools. I also asserted that when you are asking us educators to center racial equity, you are often asking us to oppose our very own bosses, our district administrators. Tonight, I'd like to offer some more evidence of that In partnership with the Center for Racial Equity, the district now offers 4 3-part trainings, including racial equity literacy and ethnic studies. These trainings are part of what made the Ethnic Studies Summer Institute such a resounding success. The description of these trainings was compiled into a 3-page handout and distributed to schools, but through the principals. I have surveyed teachers across the district, and most never received this handout. In other words, scores of principals did not share the document with their staff, or even the school's BLT, which is in charge of professional development. We can celebrate that 30 schools have requested such trainings, but we also have to remember that that means 70 schools have not. And they don't need to, because racial equity trainings are not mandatory. But it gets worse. At one of these trainings this year, at Ballard, a teacher, predictably a white male, pushed back against a racial equity literacy 101 training. He asserted that Trayvon Martin jumped George Zimmerman and began shouting at the trainers. Staff encouraged an administrator to intervene. His response, "Now is not the time. Now is not the time." I ask you, what consequences does the district really face when it fails at addressing racism? I know it must be embarrassing when it gets to the press that a white teacher has called 911 on a black 10 or 11-year-old child, but do you or the principals or the executives that line this room really face any concrete consequences? I'm asking because I do not know. I have 2 more questions. If you were the Ethnic Studies program manager and you had a staff of exactly 0, how would you achieve, and I'm quoting from your 2017 Ethnic Studies resolution, district-wide integration of ethnic studies into existing and future K-12 curriculum, including courses required for graduation? I'm asking because I don't know. I don't think it's possible to do so. And so my last question is, will you please do something courageous in support of ethnic studies, because we need you? Thank you for your time.
Good evening. My name is Carol Simmons. The UWAA Multicultural Alumni Partnership, MAP, invites everyone to attend the Bridging the Gap breakfast on October 19th that will be held in the University of Washington Hub Ballroom. For 25 years, MAP has worked to connect the region's diverse communities, promote equity at the UW, and celebrate achievements of distinguished alums, community members, and students. The MAP breakfast benefits the MAP Endowment Scholarship Fund, which reached the $1 million mark last year. This year, 2 former Seattle Public School students are recipients of MAP scholarships. They are Christian Love, 5th year doctoral student in the College of Education, who volunteers as a youth mentor at Denny Middle School, and William Walker, a graduate of West Seattle High School and a junior in the field of ethnic studies. Previously, with great pride, MAP honored school board directors Patu and Pinkham as distinguished alums for their commitment to diversity. 25 years ago, Superintendent Stanford spoke to 30 attendees in a tiny room at the Hub. Last year, a live band entertained over 300 attendees in the Hub Ballroom. In fact, many guests got up and danced spontaneously, enthusiastically celebrating the endowment, the student scholarship recipients, the distinguished alums, and diversity. It was so fun to watch UW President Casse, King County Executive Constantine, Martin Luther King County Councilman Gossett, UW Regent Rice, and School Board Director President Harris, dancing with wild jubilation in celebration. Call the UWAA to register for the MAP breakfast and congratulate the student scholarship recipients, honor the distinguished alums, and if you so choose, dance with the stars. Thank you.
Carol, if we sign up, do we get to sit at your table? All in. Thank you.
After Amy Pace, we will have Yuki Sofranas, followed by Anthony Sofranas, and then Antoinette Anguolo.
Good evening. I would like to thank the board for the opportunity to provide public testimony. I am here in opposition to the proposal to convert John Stanford and McDonald International from option schools to attendance area schools. This plan has been framed as a solution to over-enrollment in other neighborhood schools, which is a legitimate concern. But I believe that at its heart, this solution represents a challenge to the district's commitment to equity and inclusion. I am a parent, but I am also a researcher at the University of Washington. I study how early language and literacy lead to lifelong learning. The data are clear. Traditional models of neighborhood schooling often serve to perpetuate racial and socioeconomic inequities. The proposed changes directly conflict with the district's stated priorities for enrollment planning, which include actively seeking greater representation from historically underrepresented communities and ensuring equity and equal opportunity for students throughout Seattle. It must be acknowledged that our heritage language speakers and our students of color would lose the most from this proposed change. When I moved my family here from Philadelphia, I was thrilled to learn that my children might have the opportunity to study in a public school that celebrates cultural differences and strives for global citizenship, even though we don't live in the geozone. I believe to provide the same opportunity for more students, the district should increase, not decrease, access to dual language immersion programs. With every decision, no matter how small, we need to continue our progress toward equity and educational justice. Thank you.
Good evening, konbanwa, buenos noches. I'm Yuki Sophronas, a parent of Northwest Pathway of Dual Language Immersion Program, parent of 8th grader and 4th grader. Putting aside my hat as a parent of John Stanford and Hamilton, my friend and I volunteered at our SPS admission fair in January this year. International Education Administrator Michelle Oki and two of us kept answering questions for 4 hours and line was endless. We felt very strong demand for DLI from many community of this city. Why I really care about dual language immersion program so much? 8 years ago, my daughter joined John Stanford as a kindergartner. Many of the students didn't know the language. Amazingly, kids started counting Japanese and singing Spanish in playground and hallway in a couple of months, and they speak so naturally. Since students start the language young and early, I have been experiencing that students get 2 languages no matter how they started. Yearly, I volunteer at 5th grade Japanese class as a judge for their final project before graduation. Students choose topic, research in Japanese, present in Japanese, and Q&A session in Japanese. It's amazing. Being DLI parent for more than 7 years, I started to notice language skill is not the only thing they have been learning. Students have been together in the same classroom with a mixture of I speak this language, you speak that language. Students are exposed to think many ways daily. They gain enrichment with many ways to look at things, and I start to realize that is essential for kids to become global citizens. Together with McDonald and Hamilton Lincoln, we would like to support completing pathway for global citizen education. Thank you so much.
Hello, my name is Anthony Sopronis. I am 9 years old and I am in the Japanese immersion program at John Stanford. I have many friends there that I have made through the immersion program, and they come from all parts of Seattle. I have done the Japanese immersion program for 5 years, and I can speak it, write it, read it, and understand it fluently. The immersion program means a lot to me. Some of my friends have never been to Japan. If they would be able to communicate in the country where they have never been. The immersion program is very important to us. We learn so much from it, and I like my friends and classmates. Please keep the immersion program. Thank you.
After Antoinette, we will have Manuela Sly, followed by Jody Olney, and then Victor Dumas.
That's a hard act to follow. Thank you for your service to our district. I appreciate the complexity of the overcrowding situation at Green Lake Elementary, and I empathize with the families there. I'm here to represent or to read Well, first of all, my name's Antoinette Angulo. I'm the mother of a first grader in the Spanish program at John Stanford International School. I'm going to read some prepared remarks by a father, Victor Dumas, who's the dad of a kindergartner at John Stanford, who's in the Spanish program. You all should have copies of his remarks. I'm going to read just a few of these. Bottom line, he suggests instead of increasing geozones at John Stanford and McDonald, which would provide minimal relief to Green Lake, around the range of 6 to 12 students a year was sort of the prediction. In the short term, consider underutilized or unoccupied space in the area, like perhaps at Lincoln High School, maybe the Fairview building up in the northeast. He suggests phasing out the geozone, but over maybe a 5-year period. Also increase heritage set-asides, again, over a 5-year period at the same time. Some data that he pulled from the Seattle Public School enrollment website. According to enrollment data published by Seattle Public School District, John Stanford and JSIS and McDonald combined enrolled a total of 506 students living within the Green Lake Elementary service area. Nearly 50% of its total population and almost 25% more than Green Lake Elementary itself. About a third of the entire student body at John Stanford and McDonald does not live in the Green Lake Elementary service area or the BF Day service area. However, this small group commutes from 38 other service areas to attend these schools, making both schools the most geographically diverse schools in the entire school district. By the way, John Stanford is an ethnic minority majority school and has been for a few years now. Thank you.
Buenas tardes. My name is Manuela Sly. I'm Seattle Council PTSA president. For the record, I'm here as a parent of 4 kids, 1, 2, 3, 4, and a former member of the Dual Language Immersion Task Force. Our first set of recommendations went to Dr. Nyland back in the summer of 2016, over 3 years ago, including our recommendation to increase the set-aside seats for heritage speakers from 15% to at least 30%. Concord, 40%, because of the area where they operate. Over the last 3 years, community efforts, emphasis in community efforts, because it was our community trying to make this a reality. We have spoken to Enrollment Department. We have met with both principals from John Stanford and McDonald, brought it to the attention of the superintendent, and testify at board meetings, just like we are today. Unfortunately, despite our efforts, we haven't been successful. Now we're facing upcoming changes to Green Lake attendance area that will greatly impact the access of heritage speakers to dual language programs. So instead of going up to 30%, we're concerned that it's gonna go even lower than the 15% that we have. That we also have to look into the criteria, what is a heritage native speaker, because that's also a flawed process. Our community respectfully requests you to consider the task force recommendations before any changes are made in the new assignment plan. And I'm gonna take the rest of my time to share with you why dual language is important for our families. Because my kids had the opportunity to attend international schools, both my girls, Adria and Sabrina, have guaranteed a seal of biliteracy on their high school diploma. I could not be any prouder. My middle schooler here, Giovanni, is attending Denny, and he is taking Spanish. He's taking his Washington history classes in Spanish, as well as attending Proyecto Saber as an elective and Los Hermanos Unidos after school. He's thriving. And Marcelo, this little one, was able to spend time and help his abuelita, his grandmother from Mexico, at the store and at the local library last week. When she came to visit, she doesn't speak English, so he was great help. So we're very proud of Marcelo as well. All my kids speak Spanish and can develop a relationship with their family in Mexico and learn about their culture and heritage. So please listen to heritage speakers and native speakers' families and don't take this away from us. Thank you.
After Jody, we will have Victor Dumas, followed by Christine Shigaki, and then Akiko Kurochi.
name is Jody Olney. I'm here on behalf of the Seattle Indian Services Commission to talk about our affordable housing project. And the need to talk to you all came to my attention because we applied for funding with the City of Seattle, their Office of Housing, as well as the Housing Trust Fund. And one of the requirements, because we are aiming to serve workforce families at 50 and 60% AMI, is to have consultation with the local school district and also get feedback from the community about the increased enrollment that we anticipate in serving those families. We're in the very early stages. We anticipate over the course of 2 phases, building 200 units of affordable housing with units ranging from studios to 3 bedrooms. The goal being to serve families and multi-generational families as needed. So I think clarification would be appreciated. When I wrote to staff, they suggested I come testify. I don't know if there's a more formal process for facilitating the increased enrollment piece. We are continuing community outreach generally, as this is a multi-year process. But yeah, I think the schools that would be impacted or that are close to this site would be Billy Gatzer Elementary, Washington Middle School, and Garfield High School. So I'll plan to circle back with staff unless people have questions now. Thanks.
Victor? Christine?
Oh, okay. Sorry. Okay, equipment problems. I can't see the clock. Okay, sorry. Christine Shigaki. I'm a Seattle Public Schools alum and have 2 kids in SPS, and I'm a lifelong South Seattle resident. I thank you for the opportunity to speak with you this evening. I agree with the district that we need to make courageous, bold, and brave changes that to the inherently dysfunctional system. To help those that are furthest from educational justice, we need well thought out planning. The South End community is vulnerable, and hasty decisions can greatly affect our community. If SPS believes in minority excellence, you must offer robust HC programs in the Southeast. The gap will not close by limiting opportunities of those of color. Dissolving HC in the Southeast area would be disastrous as there would not be a large enough cohort in each school to provide an opportunity of social, emotional support and academic rigor. This will only cause a greater divide in equity. Considerations to increase racial diversity in advanced learning, offering a range of programs where kids are academically challenged, including the outliers that are categorized as high cap. Rolling application and greater outreach to South End schools, universal and racially non-biased testing. Encourage kids of color to participate in high cap. Diversity in teaching staff and mandatory cultural training. A test pilot program to see how MTSS would work prior to dissolving the HCC cohort. And follow the Alt-F people of color recommendation that includes preserving the cohort. TAF at Washington Middle School, no information has been given to us on how they will serve our huge range of divergent needs. One size does not fit all. Please listen to your community. After a difficult year last year, please let our leadership and our community rebuild before adding another change. As we work towards racial equity, please remember that it is the district's strategic plan to provide excellence in education for every student, and its vision is that every student receives high-quality, world-class education. It does not say at the expense of one cohort or another. If we are to achieve equity in its true form, the district should be promoting transparency, inclusivity, helpfulness, understanding, acceptance, and kindness. These attributes build trusting relationships, which is more important than data and numbers. Trust and relationships are necessary in working towards a both-and solution, which is key in working towards real and sustainable equity. Thank you.
After Akiko Kikuchi, we'll have Juan De La Paz, followed by Brian Terry and Megan Whitcomb.
Hi, I'm Akiko Karachi. I'm a mother of a 2nd grader at John Stanford, a dual language program. She was so lucky to be able to get in because she was a heritage speaker. I felt it was like a huge rush of relief when she got in, because not only is the dual language program something to learn language, a second language, which is amazingly great for the brain, but it also it gives a supportive community where, again, very diverse, all over from Seattle, all these families come together to learn these languages and to participate in the culture and everything. I do believe it creates an environment that fosters cultural curiosity, flexibility of the brain, and to also be respectful of each other. And that's definitely a big theme there. I do feel like having this option taken away from us would be a huge hit for the whole community. I can tell you Seattle is growing so big as a global city now. Every day I'm a medical doctor. I see so many people who speak a different language, and it's so huge for me to be able to speak Japanese to my patients. A quarter of my patients are Japanese. So it's such a, I think it really feeds into this idea that Seattle will grow to be a big global society as we go forward. So yeah, I don't really have a lot of answers in terms of how do we address the Green Lake crowded situation. I know that my previous neighborhood in Magnolia, they did build a whole nother school to accommodate more students there. So I saw that building go up, and so yeah, it's really hard to know how do you accommodate that. But I do like to beseech the committee to preserve the schools as a dual language program. Thank you.
Hi, my name is Juan de la Paz, and I'm a Mexican-American, and I got a couple of notes here from my wife. I guess she gave me this so I don't say something to get kicked out of the school district. So my middle child, Christian, is twice exceptional, which means he's got a learning disability, but he's super intelligent at the same time. So 4 years ago, I get a call from his school at Wenlook that Christian flipped his table, which is very unheard of. If you know Christian, he's the kindest person that you can meet. So we went over to the school and talked to the teacher and talked to Christian, and Christian basically said, this is a very boring school. It's not challenging me. So we talked to the teacher, and the teacher agreed, yep, okay, I'll challenge him. Basically gave him same material, just 5 times as much as other students, and that wasn't enough. And so basically, we got from another parent that told us about the highly capable program. So I said, what is it going to cost? And so they told me it's $250. Fine, let's pay this. To get him tested, and he didn't succeed on the first test. And so they told us that, and I talked to Christian, and he was like, the testing itself I couldn't concentrate. There was a lot of noise, there were a lot of issues going on. Fine, so now there's requirements of get private testing, and so my wife's like, hey, by the way, it's going to cost another $700 to do this. Okay, let's take out a credit card to take out basically that so we can get our kid tested to get into this program that he needs it. Christian has been in this program for the past 4 years, and now he's a 5th grade at Fairmont Elementary, and he's exceeding. He is pretty much being taught the same math as my 8th grader, which is incredible. He's beyond exceptional in this school. And so I'm telling you guys, the program works. HCC works. The problem comes to the testing. When I have to get a credit card and get in debt to pay for my kid, for some families, that's 2 months of rent. So I talk to you of fix that problem. It's the testing that's the problem. Thank you.
Thank you.
Good evening. 9% of our students have been identified as highly capable. For years, we have tailored our program to best meet their needs. But at what cost to the other 91% of students, especially those furthest from educational justice? We identified a homogeneous group of highly capable students in order to make it easier for teachers to teach and for students to make friends. But this meant excluding virtually all underprivileged students. We serve these mostly privileged students in large cohorts at pathway schools. The concentration of privilege gave them more power to advocate for their students and more resources to fund enrichment programs. But this meant a depletion of resources and power from neighborhood schools, especially hurting those students furthest from educational justice and all students at neighborhood schools who would benefit from more access to advanced academics. And finally, in many cases, we place these mostly white, highly capable classrooms in mostly black neighborhood schools, creating so-called slave ship schools that propagate white supremacy culture. Many other districts have found good solutions to these problems. Students from all backgrounds are identified equitably in accordance with the WAC. They meet the needs of these students in their neighborhood schools and never place a highly capable classroom with a noticeably different demographic than the school in which it is placed. It is time for us to do this too. Please make the necessary changes to our program to reflect the interest of all of our students, not just the 9%. Thank you.
After Megan Wickham, we will have Vivian Moritz, followed by Julie Van Arken.
Thank you for your continued work. I want to tell you about my family and the impact dual language has had. My father-in-law is Japanese American and was born in an internment camp during World War II. When we first shared with him that we were sending our kids to John Stanford International, he was genuinely shocked to learn that a program like the dual language Japanese pathway existed, surprised that his grandson could learn Japanese in an environment that would celebrate his whole identity. His lived experience of being Japanese American in post-war Seattle was quite different. My son is autistic and struggles with social cues and communication. I knew there was research that said dual language was a good tool for kids with autism, but I didn't fully understand it. The code switching skills he has gained through the DLI program have generalized so strongly that he no longer needs behavioral therapy services. The school model is impactful. The community of teachers and families in that building has changed his life trajectory. I strongly encourage the board and the superintendent to consider expanding the DLI program for several reasons that I believe are in line with the stated goals of the district's equity standards. When implemented thoughtfully, dual language can center ELL students, celebrate their gifts, and allow for families to connect with their teachers in their home language. Dual language schools can be a powerful tool to fight the segregation of the city. 24-hour credit graduation requirements are more accessible when students earn credit for their natural bilingual talents that are accelerated through these education programs. And lastly, dual language programs close the opportunity and achievement gaps. I'm here to advocate for increasing the set-aside for heritage speakers, maintaining strong pathways and established programs, following the task force report, expanding the programs to see home languages that have not yet been valued by the district. More families deserve the feeling we had of seeing my father-in-law excited that his culture was going to be represented in a system that always ignored him. If you thoughtfully expand these programs to the languages already spoken in the district, more people can be delighted to tell their relatives that Seattle Schools is seeing their child's whole identity. Thank you.
Thank you, board members, for the opportunity to speak tonight. I am Vivian Moritz. I am a mother of a second grader and a first grader at John Stanford International School. Several members of my school community and the dual language immersion community have already highlighted tonight the many cognitive and social emotional benefits of language immersion. I join them in asking you to sustain and even increase your support for dual language immersion programs. I'm speaking to you tonight, however, more specifically about the geo-zone changes that are proposed that would give Green Lake families a tiebreaker to attend John Stanford International School and McDonald International School. I believe that this particular solution would be a step toward reducing school choice for Seattle families. Currently, 15% of spaces at John Stanford and McDonald are reserved for native speakers. The students must take and pass a language proficiency test to secure one of those spaces. And the truth is that the bar is high. Many students of Japanese and Latino descent would not pass. Our country has a complicated history, and the mother tongue of many of these families was repressed. Thankfully, times have changed, and I believe there are many second generation, third generation, fourth generation Japanese and Latino families who would love the opportunity for their kids to speak Japanese or Spanish, be able to communicate with their relatives, and have a connection to their heritage. This is a real choice Seattle Public Schools has given these families and making John Stanford and McDonald an option school. This board has a great record in equity, and I ask that as you consider your options in addressing the overcapacity issues at Green Lake, particular focus on the geozones for those schools, that you use this racial equity lens. The sign behind you is written in the first language of Seattle. I ask that you give Seattle families the choice to learn in their family's first language as well. And I just want to add, okay, sorry, thank you.
Finish your sentence.
Oh, I have a few more minutes. Oh, I just wanted to say,
Whoa.
sorry.
You have a few more sentences.
A few more sentences. A personal note, my children who are so touched by the fact that they have teachers that look like them. And it's really hard-pressed to find that opportunity even within Seattle or our broader community. And I really thank the school district for making that possible. Thank you.
Thank you.
Hi, I'm Julie Van Arken, and I've been coming to this podium to speak about Southeast boundary changes for 6 years now. But for the first time in a long time, I'm hopeful. You have 3 new boundary proposals to choose from, and one of them, Scenario G, is a racially equitable scenario. In this case, G stands for good. Scenario G displaces the fewest children overall by 160 to 200 students. It displaces the fewest Black students, Asian students, English language learners, and special education students, and presumably the fewest Latinx students, Native students, and Pacific Islander students. And based on the work group data I've seen, it looks like Scenario G only displaces 2 children from their walk zone, while the others displace 68 and 69 children from their walk zone. Please ask staff to add this walk zone data to the public maps so everyone can see it. And while you're at it, please also ask staff how much the different scenarios will affect transportation costs and how adding unnecessary routes may create further delays in bus service. Even though Scenario G is by far the most equitable scenario, you may receive more public comments in support of Scenario F, which displaces the fewest white students. As you receive feedback in support of particular scenarios, keep in mind who's in the room and who is not in the room, and support our students furthest from educational justice. Thank you.
This concludes public testimony for this evening.
Okay, we're going to round back to the consent agenda. Motion, please.
I move passage of the consent agenda.
You want a second?
Second.
And would folks like to remove anything from the consent agenda at this time? And please state the number and the title.
I was like to actually pull consent number 9, the resolution for final acceptance for the Loyal Heights Elementary.
Any other removals from the consent agenda? Seeing none, may I have a motion for the consent agenda as amended?
I move passage of the consent agenda as amended.
I second the motion.
All those in favor of passing the consent agenda as amended, please signify by saying aye.
Aye. Aye.
Okay.
Point of personal privilege.
Yes, sir.
Would the president support a motion to bring action item 4 up to the beginning of our action items list, out of respect for our transportation partners that have come to discuss that item? Is that a viable thing? If so, I would like to make
Chief
a
Narver,
motion.
I believe that's part of my privilege. Is that correct? Okay, number 4 is up.
Do you need a motion or?
Nope.
Okay.
That's part of my professional privilege here.
Thank you.
That's for all the extra good, happy work. Okay, number 4 is our newest action item. For student settlement agreement and contract modifications. Motion, please. And I might add, this is for intro and introduction. Intro and action. Intro and introduction. Hello. More coffee, please.
I move that the school board approve the settlement agreement with Exhibits 1, 2, and 3 as attached to the board action report with such minor additions, deletions, and modifications as deemed necessary by the superintendent. Immediate action is in the best interest of the district.
I second the motion.
Chief Podesta, I see you at the podium. The floor is yours, kind sir.
Thank you. Fred Podesta, Chief Operations Officer. As the board, staff, Seattle Public Schools families are aware, Seattle Public Schools has struggled to provide consistent transportation services the last couple of years. These problems, these challenges have been particularly severe at the start of school with yellow bus service and have been largely caused by a lack of qualified drivers to drive our buses, which is a problem shared by many districts across the country. While we still have many improvements to make in our overall transportation system, this year we're off to a much better start. By way of comparison, between September 2018 and December 2019, last year, we were averaging 67 late routes a day. This year we're averaging 17. In the fall of 2018, 19% of our buses did not have a full-time assigned driver. Right now we're at 7%, and we're working hard to close that gap. To achieve these improvements that we've gotten year over year, we had to do a lot of things, and in all honesty, this didn't start just now. It started in the spring, and we enjoyed pretty good service, much better service in the last spring through the end of the school year than we felt in the fall and in the spring. And really to do this, what we needed to make some changes. We needed to change our relationship with our service provider First Student to really be a partner. We encouraged, as part of that relation, First Student to offer competitive wages and benefits in a very competitive labor market to attract drivers and retain drivers, and to change their recruiting and retention practices so we can have the qualified drivers that you see in the room to drive our students, to make sure that people aren't missing instruction time. The fall to spring improvement has been a common practice. You know, we've seen that arc for a few years where we have trouble with the start of school. We had that problem in 17-18, we had that problem in 18-19, but in previous years we were not able to sustain that into the fall, even as things got better in the spring. This year again is different. We've been working hard since the spring to make sure there are enough drivers, to make sure we have a contract, a relationship that works. I think we've seen those results. We saw them in the spring, we're seeing them in the fall, and now is the time, I think, to solidify those changes and amend our contract and settle whatever differences we have between the district and First Student to, in contract, make permanent our relationship with First Student and over the contract period, and give them the tools to retain and recruit enough drivers to meet our needs. I think the board action before you does that. And the main terms that you'll see are we release all claims. Right now, you know, we've been in very serious conversations with First Student for more than a year with claims and counterclaims. It's time to settle those. Again, we need to approach each other as partners and release claims against each other. As part of this, First Student will make a payment based on the damages that were in the last contract of $400,000 to the district, and will also compensate us for services we had to procure from others in the last school year for the added cost of that. It eliminates liquidated damages from the contract and moves to a performance pay system that incentivizes us to work together on a positive front, and frankly eliminates the adversarial, punitive relationship that we had in our old relationship to something where we're working together and trying to get these results. It eliminates restrictions on our ability to hire other service providers if we need to. It exercises an option that is already built into the contract to extend the contract for another year. We know that we need to think past our current way of doing business, but we need stability and certainty for a longer period than just through this contract year, which is where we would stand right now. We would need more time. So we would like to exercise that option now and secure first student services through August 2021 and then fix prices through then. So we also have the costs understood and first student and its drivers understand how their agreements work. And lastly, it adds a licensing for a smartphone app, the First View, that would allow better real-time communications with parents and allow parents and families to track bus locations while they're in transit. We have a lot of work to make that actually happen, but getting the product provided to us as part of the contract is a great first step. And so I think you've seen since last March, April, May improvements. Those have continued, and we've re-upped this year, and so far off to a pretty good start. So I strongly recommend that we move forward and put in place a contract that supports the improvements that we've already made.
I'm going to take privilege and ask you a couple of really direct
Sure.
questions, if I might. And Chief Narver, front and center, please. So our newspapers and social media expanded about some pretty extraordinary damages for every day. And can you talk about whether or not those damages that were touted would be defensible in court, please? Because it seems like we've got a bit of a wind shift here.
What I'll say, first of all, is that the legal team has very carefully reviewed this agreement, and it is our recommendation, in addition to Director Podesta, that the board approve the settlement agreement. On the specific question, I cannot, in an open meeting, talk about an assessment of litigation risk and what was likely to happen or the range of possible outcomes. There were, as Director Podesta said, claims going in both directions. Claims by first student against the district, claims by the district against first student. This is a settlement of all of those claims, and the focus really is, as Director Podesta said, on resetting the business partnership moving forward. In an executive session, I could go into more detail about analysis of how those claims could have played out over the course of litigation. It's really nothing I can talk about here, but I will reiterate the legal team's recommendation that the board approve the agreement.
Okay, we need to create a record, though, because the record previously was different. Thank you for that. Not surprised by your advice.
Okay, thank you.
Chief Podesta, what do we tell the parents who write to us with these frankly horrific, frightening stories about their children, booster seats, et cetera? You heard that testimony tonight.
I heard that testimony. I read the
And you have been the
article.
recipient of many of those emails.
I have. And that, again, stability in our driver workforce is what will lead to better service for drivers. I think we heard public testimony tonight that, having a different driver every day was part of the problem. And so this really comes down to, having a stable workforce, and that really leads to how we compensate and recruit drivers. And those are the things we're trying to change. We're in much better shape than we were this time last year, and we're working hard to continue to close those gaps. This amendment will give further tools to help do that, and I'm confident we will continue to make this better. The start of school is a very difficult time. It is, starting up the show all over again, but compared to where we've been, it's much better, and we'll, instead of things smoothing out in January, as they have in the past couple years, we're expecting them to smooth out in the next month.
And is it a fair assumption that given the number of yellow vests and labor brothers and sisters in the room, that labor is in favor of this?
It's not my place to speak for the bargaining unit, but I would assume that's the case.
I tried so hard to softball that. Thank you. I need comments, questions, concerns from my colleagues, please. Director Burke?
I had an opportunity to meet personally with a few of our our brothers and sisters, and I thank you for joining us and for signaling your feelings on this particular item. It was very clearly telegraphed. And I really appreciate, what we continue to learn as an educational institution is that, partnerships are far superior to punitive. Every day, every action, every person, when we can collaborate, we get farther. And I think this is really evidence of us walking our talk. So I thank all of the teams that have worked to put this together and bring what was previously, in my mind, a publicly and privately contentious issue into something that I feel like we as a district can be proud of.
Director Pinkham?
Thank you. I can recall when we were actually discussing the contract a while back, and one of the questions I had was how many hours the bus drivers had to work just to qualify for health insurance. And it was a tremendous amount because they were considered not just their 9-month, but for the full 12 months for their hours. So I'm particularly happy to see that we are increasing, looks like, health coverage for our bus drivers along with the wages. So thanks for your help on getting that done.
Seeing no further comments, questions, concerns, roll call, please.
Director Burke?
Aye.
Director Geary?
Aye.
Director Hersey?
Aye.
Director Mack?
Aye.
Director Pinkham?
Aye.
Director Harris?
Aye. And thank you to our staff, our labor partners, and those folks at First Student that managed to help us get here. Thank you very much. Let's take a 15-minute break so folks can get some food and a bite of fresh air. Be back here at exactly We are taking consent item number 9 as our first action item. Bexpor BTA 3 Resolution 2019-20-6, final acceptance of contract P5069 with Skanska USA Building Inc. for the Loyal Heights Skanska, thank you. My apologies. USA Building, Inc. for the Loyal Heights Elementary School Modernization and Addition Project. This came before OPS September 5th for approval. Motion, please.
I move that the school board adopt Resolution 2019/20-6 and accept the work performed under contract P5069 with Skanska USA Building Incorporated for the Loyal Heights Elementary Modernization and Addition Project as final.
I second the motion.
Chief Podesta, the floor is yours, sir.
This is final acceptance of the Loyal Heights modernization. The school was occupied starting in the fall of 2018. This is just the final release of contract retainage and final acceptance of the contract. There was some public testimony about the playground that, if you'd like me to, I can address a little bit at least. The point of the project was to expand a building significantly from 33,000 square feet to 55,000 square feet. And that did take about 20% of the playground to accomplish. Since it was a capacity project, we did also remove 8 portables as part of expanding the building, and those portables were, of course, on the playground. So I'm not going to say it's a wash, but that we did and improve the playground in the process. So I think the recommendation that we have to consider playground size and our ed spec and how we design buildings is well point taken, and we will continue to work on that as we go forward. But this project was largely successful, and I think it's a good building, and it's time to accept the contract.
Director Pinkham and then Director Mack.
Yeah, thank you for sharing about the 20% reduction, and kind of curious, because this actually brings me back to when I was first running for the board, and Loyal Heights reached out to me and saying, hey, we don't want this mega school, is what they referred to it as, taking over our small neighborhood. We've been working hard. They did playground improvements to help out, and then to find out that, oh, okay, now our improvements are going to be partially taken away, or actually, I don't know, partially, but maybe completely in their perspective, but I can't speak for them on that. But one of my things I was always wondering about, what are the size of our playgrounds? I mentioned, I think people recall way back then, that if we can have some kind of thing in operations or our policies that we try to maintain a certain square footage or percentage of playgrounds for our schools so our students can go out and outside and play. I did receive an email from a community member concerned about students staying inside too much, especially when it's raining. We need students to go out and exercise. So if we can, if you see that as something liable to do, I appreciate that kind of input. And I'd also like to hear from our ops chair about, is this something we can think about including that, hey, this new construction will reduce the playground by this size, but it will add X, Y, and Z as well, so we can make those kind of comparisons. Thank you.
Thank you, Director Pinkham, for bringing up the history on that, because there was a lot of concern around whether or not the playground was going to be large enough, and the space in the building with the expansion of the number of classrooms and whether or not the common spaces would be large enough. They added a very large gym, which for indoor resource I think is helpful. So I'm curious to know whether or not you actually have any information from the school community now as to whether or not their recesses are overcrowded or if they're going well, if they've got, if they're managing the building and the playground and lunchtime activities effectively.
I have not heard any concerns about capacity for outdoor space in the school. It's not fully occupied, so I think it's something we need to keep an eye on, but at this point we haven't heard those types of complaints.
So then just as a follow-on to Director Pinkham's comments around the consideration in construction, is there already something in our ed specs that we do consider their overall common spaces in relation to the number of students and classrooms that are expected? And is playgrounds part of that calculation?
I would have to look into that for you. I shouldn't blurt out an answer, 'cause I'm not that well versed, no.
I would agree that it should be part of the analysis going forward on ed specs and in consideration. So however we work that into the process would be helpful.
No, I think play space in the schools and also how we do capacity planning for athletic fields is something we're really going to have to take, adopt a different approach going forward.
Yes, thank you.
Director Burke?
I just have the generic elementary educational specifications pulled up here and did a quick search, and playground is mentioned in it 7 times, but there's no explicit specification around square footage per student. In fact, there's actually a thing that says under playground, it says no special requirements. So that would be a place where, we could put either a goal. I mean, every ed spec starts as a goal, and then it has to be adapted per site. So that would be something for future boards to consider.
Director Pinkham.
Yeah, and I know especially what happened recently with Hazelwolf and its new construction, and even though it had playground space, but since it kind of came up with our last board meeting about using artificial turf instead of natural grass and how that can impact, and they had natural grass and that thing got flooded and muddy, and then the students couldn't use it anymore. So we definitely need to make sure that we look at that as well, because I don't want to see all playgrounds become natural turf, I would like to, or artificial turf. I would like to see it be as natural as possible, and how we can approach that to make sure not only the square footage per student, in particular the elementaries, but also that it's natural.
And it's darn sure not crumb rubber. Director Geary, please.
I understand the idea behind not having it locked down, because what it makes me think of are the conversations around an urban or a downtown elementary. And to meet the specifications that we have in our historical elementary schools, you know, to create a specification to preserve historical sizes, when we may end up having to put in at some point an elementary that just isn't going to have it in an urban area that has a lot of rain. So I just caution you in terms of being too aspirational.
Dr. Pinkham?
Aye.
Dr. Mack?
Aye.
Dr. Geary?
Aye.
Dr. Burke?
Aye.
Dr. Hersey?
Aye.
Dr. Harris? This motion is passed unanimously.
I move that the school board authorize the superintendent to renew the contract with Seattle Children's Hospital for 2 additional years, covering the period from August 1st, 2019 to June 30th, 2021, at a cost of up to $380,000 per year, for a total cost of up to $761,200 for 2 years, for athletic training services with any minor additions, deletions, and modifications deemed necessary by the superintendent, and to take any necessary actions to implement the contract. Approval of this motion would renew the maximum 3-year contract for the final 2 years.
Second the motion.
Comments, questions, concerns from my colleagues? Director Mack.
This came through ops for approval, but I do see that it's been updated since introduction, and I'm curious if we can just highlight publicly for the record what those updates are, please.
Good evening, Wyatt Jesse, Chief of Schools and Continuous Improvement. There were 2 specific updates. One of those updates was just the overall cost. There was a slight adjustment of $600 for this year, and for a total of adding up $1,200 for the sake of the additional 2 years. And then the other one was just listing the sports. I think that was Director Harris that requested, or it might have been you, Director Mack. Somebody was asking what were the sports that are covered underneath that. And again, it was really, again, as I was saying then, and I'll say again, it is all sports. So it's not just for boys, or it's loaded to that. And you can see that on this particular bar, that we do cover all of the WIA sanctioned sports for both boys and girls at the high school level.
Other comments, questions, concerns? I noticed, Chief Jesse, that we didn't address the questions and concerns about non-WAIA sponsored sports, Unified and Ultimate. And those are both equity issues in my way of thinking. And I guess I wonder when we are going to embrace those club sports that have more participation and fold them in, A, to our budget, and B, lobby WAIA to have a broader vision of the world.
I think that's a great question. I think there's a lot of questions that we put to the state just to around funding for this. As I mentioned then, and again I'll mention now, is we are evaluating the cost of athletics. And so when I took this on last fall, looking at the budget, we also were wrestling with transportation, and transportation costs have gone up so much, it's really eating away at our ability to fund anything additional at this point, and just really looking at our basic needs. And then,
but the state gives us a rebate for a good bit of our transportation, correct?
No. That was
It's
the
not
question, I think, last
guaranteed,
time.
but they have been, correct?
No. Oh, I'll let Jolene answer those questions.
Good evening, Jolene Berge, Chief Financial Officer. The state does not pay for athletic transportation, period. They pay for to and from school. That's what they're paying for. So all of the transportation for athletics is on us. And we have put probably $500,000 more in, a lot of it driven by the bell schedule change, frankly.
Thank you for that clarification. Asked 2 years ago what the cost to provide Unified would be, and still haven't gotten that information.
Yeah, we're actually, Unified season's kicking off at Roosevelt High School this Friday, so I will just make that quick note. So that's awesome. So we have expanded it, but I am actually still working on that, and so
And
staff.
I appreciate you just started your new job September 1.
Yeah, that I don't. Yes, we are actually working on that request with staff. Just you asked specifically what is being provided for club sports and Unified across the district. We have some that I'm trying to holistically get that, and I also we'll have some more additional information on what that could look like around estimated costs if we were to do something like that. And so that's my goal, to get that to you by the end of the month. It's quite expansive. Yeah.
I don't doubt that it is. Equity is expensive. Yeah. Director Pinkham.
Looks like there's still a Scribner error that the fiscal impact wasn't updated to reflect the extra $600 per year.
So the cost it's because this is the additional 2 years, so that would be the 600 times 2, and that's why it's $1,200.
Yeah, but under number 5, fiscal impact, that hasn't been updated. It was updated up above showing, but it hasn't been updated in the fiscal impact revenue source.
Chief Narver, that's a Scribner's error, is that correct? Thank you, sir. Seeing no further comment, questions, concerns from my colleagues, roll call, please.
Director Geary?
Aye.
Director Hersey?
Aye.
Director Pinkham?
Aye.
Director Burke?
Aye.
Director Mack?
Aye.
Director Harris?
Aye.
This motion is passed unanimously.
C, action item number 2, BEX 5 award, architectural and engineering contract P1628 to NAC Architecture for the Northgate Elementary School replacement project. Came before Ops September 5th for approval. Motion, please.
I move that the school board authorize the superintendent to execute A/E contract P1628 with NAC Architecture in the amount of $5,370,305 plus reimbursable expenses of $50,000 for architectural and engineering services. The total contract amount of $5,420,305 is for the Northgate Elementary School replacement BEX 5 project, with any minor additions, deletions, and modifications deemed necessary by the superintendent, and to take any necessary action to implement this contract.
I second the motion.
Comments, questions, concerns from my colleagues? We did ask a fair number of questions during intro.
I'm just curious,
Pinkham,
can
then
I
Director Mack.
address the points that were brought up in public testimony? Are you familiar with those, or do you want me to read them again?
My recollection is since this is a school replacement, this was, the questions were related to investments we had made. Thank you. In the life of the school, that are now going to be demolished when we replace the building. There is a chance, God help us, that this building may be landmarked, so I don't know exactly what will happen. And we face this challenge all the time. This is not a building that provides the best educational experience. That doesn't mean we can't afford not to take care of it and make investments along the way. My recollection is this building rated very low when we did our condition assessments for buildings, and this has been a high priority for the district. I recognize the sunk cost. I think we face that problem every day. We have to make investments, we have to do things for kids now, and we need to do things for students in the future.
Yeah, because I can see that it does note that the upgrades were technology. I know for the old buildings, sometimes I prefer technology is just put ducts into the hallways and run all the wires that are needed for the technology. And the other would be requirements. ADA, it's something we had to do. We can't ignore those. But I know that the Northgate community has appreciated that we did get them on the BECS, and I think they're definitely going to look forward to getting their school remodeled, upgraded.
Director Mack? Okay. Director Burke?
Just one question about this project. Has it been identified? What is the model? Is it going to be a GCCM or is it going to be a...
That's our preference,
Okay.
is to do a GCCM. We haven't gone through the process yet.
Okay, thank you.
So does it come back to us for the GCCM decision then or not? Help me understand, please.
That is not something we bring to the board. It's an administrative decision. We do need to get certification from the project review committee at the state level. It has to give us the authority to use an alternative public works process, but that's a decision we ultimately make.
I'm just used to seeing that as part of these bars, so I'm trying to understand the distinction and the difference.
Well, because it's just the architectural and engineering part, this is the very first step. We're designing the new thing, and we haven't completely planned the project. I think we believe, and to not let the cat out of the bag, but I think this is one of the recommendations you're going to hear from the BECS BTA Oversight Committee, is that for like building replacements and big enough projects, the district really ought to lean towards GCCM. So I think that makes sense, but we need to get a design done first before we ultimately decide how best to deliver the project.
There's no such thing as letting the cat out of the bag when we're on the same team.
There you go. I just hate to spoil the drama.
And there you have it. I have a couple of questions, if I might. You made a reference to, God forbid, it might be landmarked. And is it a fair comment that if a building is landmarked, it can add 30% to the cost?
It can add costs, and it can really constrain the outcome depending on the nature of the building. I think this building in particular we think would be a challenge to provide the best results for students if we have to preserve the building envelope.
Wow. Okay. And I might add that Northgate was the beneficiary of our course correction in doubling points in the BECS 5 principles that we evaluated and moved around projects. So, seeing no further comments, questions, concerns from my colleagues, roll call, please.
Dr. Hersey?
Aye.
Dr. Mack? Dr. Pinkham?
Aye.
Dr. Burke?
Aye.
Dr. Geary?
Aye.
Dr. Harris?
Aye.
This motion is passed unanimously.
C3, action item, BECS 5 award, architectural and engineering contract P1637 to Malum Architects for the Viewlands Elementary School Replacement Project. Came before OPS September 5th for approval. Motion, please.
I move that the school board authorize the superintendent to execute A/E contract P1637 with Malum Architects in the amount of $5,312,256 plus reimbursable expenses of $40,000 for architectural and engineering services. The total contract amount of $5,352,256 is for the Viewlands Elementary School Replacement BECS 5 project, with any minor additions, deletions, and modifications deemed necessary by the superintendent, and to take any necessary actions to implement the contract.
I second the motion.
Comments, questions, concerns from my colleagues? Seeing none, roll call, please.
Dr. Burke?
Aye.
Dr. Geary?
Aye.
Dr. Hersey?
Aye.
Dr. Mack?
Aye.
Dr. Pinkham?
Aye.
Dr. Harris?
Aye.
This motion is passed unanimously.
Okay, we are at D, introduction items. Number 1, amending board policy number 2015, selection and adoption of instructional materials, and board policy number 2020, waiver of basic instructional materials. This came before CNI September 10th for consideration. Approval of this item would make edits to board policy number 2015, selection and adoption of instructional materials, and to board policy number 2020, waiver of basic instructional materials. These materials have been updated October 1, 2019. Chief DeBacker, if first you could address what's been updated. And then the floor is yours.
Diane DeBacker, Chief Academic Officer. Thank you, President Harris. The only update has to do with our reference to Policy 4110. We had reference 4110 at 2 different points during the bar. We took one out and failed to take the second one out, so that was the addition. And the only reason that we did that is that 4110 governs family and community committees. And after a formal review by our legal counsel, they have informed us that the IMC is not a family or a community committee.
Can you tee this up, please?
I will.
And I expect that our Curriculum and Instruction Chair, Jill Geary, and our former CNI Chair, Rick Burke, will have information to add as far as the history of this project.
Yes, I will tee it up for you. As you know, you have been looking at this as a board for several months, and it has been something that I have been looking at for the 10 months that I have been here as well. You will recall as we met with you one-on-one and two-on-twos earlier this spring, we had copies for you that were color-coded that had about 5 different colors going depending on what the revision was and where it came from. We have come a long way since that time, and we are now to a policy that I believe reflects the desires of the board and the desires of the staff to make 2015 a policy that allows us to adopt curriculum and adopt curriculum and instructional materials that are from a commercial source as well as from a source that comes from the ground up, such as what we did with some of our science materials, such as what you've seen with since time immemorial and what we will see in the very near future with ethnic studies. So this is our opportunity to get this done. We are very proud of the work that's happened so far. And the reason the work has happened is because of the input of all of you. We have had many sessions about this, as Director Geary and Director Burke can share. In CNI, we have had this before them several times. We have wordsmithed it significantly, but I think the wordsmithing was definitely needed. Just to remind you why we're doing this, the current board policy does not allow for adoption of instructional materials that help existing instructional materials to fully address established learning standards, nor does the current policy provide a process to adopt those non-commercially produced materials. And we are also proposing smaller changes to Policy 2020, which governs the instructional materials waivers, to align to the proposed changes in Policy 2015. During our last discussion with CNI, we made the following changes. We ensured that there was a distinction was clear between required core materials adopted by the board and approved supplementary materials approved by district staff. We added the overarching guiding principle that the board has the ability to add guiding principles for a particular adoption. We added other specific guiding principles, such as are they based, as our recommendation based on best practices and research, including benchmarking and efficacy from other districts. And then we changed the reference to SPS staff charged with particular responsibilities within this policy to the superintendent or designee in nearly every case so that we could be consistent with the wording as we went on. We also added how waivers might be triggered, and we added specific wording that says instructional material adoptions can also be initiated to address identified needs in specific courses or grade levels resulting from obsolete, biased, or unavailable adopted instructional materials, and widespread requests for instructional material waivers per Board Policy 2020. I already talked about 4110, and if you have questions about that, I can answer those as well. I think that tees it up enough.
Thank you so much for all your work, and I definitely want to also thank Kyle Kinoshita for his many, many hours of work on this, though he's no longer with the district. And what I like about this is that we in making this policy, we went back to basics. We created an outline to figure out what it is that we wanted it to do. We filled that outline back in. We cross-referenced it with the procedures. And then we looked at recent adoptions, consulting with both Kathleen Vasquez and Mary Margaret Mitchell. Is that right? No. Welch. Sorry. Don't know where I got that. I went off into a sociologist name. Okay, so, and that we took our own people and asked them what is the process that we used, and then we cross-referenced it again against what we're doing, all in hopes that it is intuitive, it makes sense, it is reinforced by the work that is currently going on within the peer groups, and that we come out with consistent processes that people can trust. And I think with that, and an acknowledgement that we as a board needed to be better aware of when waivers were becoming adoptions, that with all of that, that this policy does a much better job with getting us to a place where we can adopt materials that our community thinks is appropriate for us. So, Director Burke?
I also want to share gratitude with all the teams that made this happen. This is something that teed up when I was chair of Curriculum Instruction Committee, and then took a little while to work through its different ebbs and flows. So I also appreciate that we have added intentionality about what starts an adoption, because that was one of the sticking points. Is it started on a particular cycle that is just fixed based on some calendar? Is it started based on some sort of random number generator? What is the transparency around that? And we were very intentional that it started based on an identified need. And that could be new standards, that could be existing programs being outdated, or schools not, basically the patient rejecting the organ and needing to have new materials to align with new process and practices. So I really appreciate that. 2 comments. I would like to go further into the discussion around Policy 4110, because that is an area that when we look back at previous adoptions, we've had an inconsistent record of public transparency around the IMC and what the IMC does, and posting IMC minutes and things like that, which is really the intent that I had when we were talking about including that. So I'm interested how we're going to maintain that, and why this wouldn't apply here. The other point is that in committee we had a lot, and out of committee we had a lot of conversation around Policy 2015, but this this motion is actually for 2 policies, 2015 and 2020. And 2020 is a point of, I think, we want to foster innovation. We want to provide a level of, a tool that schools can use that innovation and implement it and help the rest of us get better. But we also have to provide enough transparency around it. And so I would like to add one line in there about the superintendent shall also maintain a public record of waivers, which I think is something that is, we can figure out where to put that. I could come up with some language and suggest it, whether it's a formal amendment. I wanted to put that into conversation now, because already it's reported to the committee, but once it goes into committee, then it just goes into committee somewhere. And my request would be that that lives at a predictable location so people can understand what are those innovations that are coming up through the district. Those are my 2 points.
May I take privilege and ask the superintendent if she would object to that? She would not.
So Director Burke, are you asking in 2020 in the paragraph on page 2 of 3 that talks about how the superintendent shall inform, we add a sentence there about then we will post those, or something similar?
Right. shall make publicly available and inform the board annually of blah, blah, blah. Whatever language
Got it.
is amenable and consistent with what our normal practices are. And thank you, I appreciate it.
Director Mack.
I echo the appreciation for the hard work of working through this, and I really appreciate Director Gary's explanation how it's really important to actually go through and map it out first, and what are we trying to achieve here, and make sure that we had all of that. That process has taken us a while, but certainly the end product is more reflective of the board and the district's needs. So I really appreciate that thoughtfulness. My first question, I have two questions. One is actually in 2015 and the other is in 2020. Can you, as you expressed a minute ago, there was a delineation between board approved and approved supplementary materials that are approved by staff. And I was trying to unravel in my brain whether or not ethnic studies or similar type things were going to be considered supplementary materials or not. And then if it is in that, and regardless of whether or not it is, what exactly is the review process by which the curriculum is reviewed for all of the same things that are in here about, the different priorities that we have to make sure that it meets those goals?
It depends on what we do with that particular content. So in the example of ethnic studies, if it were a standalone course, that would be a core instructional material. However, if it is something that we push in or integrate with another curricular area or another content area, those would be extended core instructional materials. Both of those require board approval.
Okay, so for the ethnic studies example, it looks like a board approval process for ethnic studies. But on the
either way,
okay.
We have not yet made that decision.
Right. Sure.
As a staff and as a board. Obviously, if it's a course or integrated,
sure.
We know the direction that we've been going the past few years is that it's integrated.
Right. But just for clarity, the supplementary materials are staff approved, and those are, maybe in a building they're adding worksheets from another book or something, and it's not.
Exactly.
It's
right.
not okay.
Supplementary instructional materials are ones that the principal approves or the superintendent or their designee. An example of that I think is very easy to understand right now at this time and thinking about the presidential election next year. We teach classes on government and civics, but we may want to have a supplementary material that's all about the voter's guide that literally takes students through, here's something that you would use as you were preparing to go to the polls and vote. So that would be something that principals would approve. I mean, that's just
and
one
actually,
example.
I do believe that the King County Elections does make those guides for students. They're amazing.
They
and
do.
That would be it's a great tool to use.
They do, and they've already visited me. So
excellent. So my second question is about the 2020 and the paragraph that's deleted here that says that when the district begins a process to adopt new instructional materials pursuant to Policy 2015, staff participating in the adoption process should evaluate the school-level data for the subject up for adoption of all schools with the relevant grades. And the purpose of that is to learn how we're doing with the materials that are in use. So if we're using materials under waiver in schools, if it's being considered in the adoption process, the data of whether or not that's working would be used. It's deleted from the waiver policy from 2020. Did that get put back into 2015? Or is that something that maybe we've had an oversight in our process? Because for me, the requirement that we actually look back at the data of the schools that are using waivers, if we're going to be considering those materials, and that be required to be part of the process, is still important to have in there. And that whole paragraph is important. I just don't know if it ended up being slotted somewhere else or if it's actually deleted.
I will need to check on that and see if where that's at, or if it's even in 2020 enough for us to feel comfortable with it.
So then my personal request would be that this paragraph, if it isn't adequately reflected, that it be unstricken. Is that a good word? No. That it would be, so what in the review thing it says reject, comment, reject, or yes, anyway. I think you all understand that this paragraph would actually come back and not be stricken. And it sounds like I see heads nodding around. Yeah. Yes, thank you.
And let me double check on that, because it could be also over back in 2015 with all those bulleted items that are there. We may have considered it being there.
Right, so
yeah.
Just as long as it's in one or the other.
Director Pinkham.
I was looking through this one that, I'm sorry I didn't bring this up in C&I, but things are starting to stand out to me a bit more. When we had the definition of courses, we say K through 12, but with the rise of pre-K, are we going to see eventually the need to say pre-K through 12? Because the number is increasing, so. Yeah. So that's one question. And then as I read through this, I see the word designee repeated quite often, but only one place does it say superintendent's designee. It doesn't say who does a designation for the others.
We will clean that up if necessary.
Dr. Geary, please.
On the preschool curriculum adoption, we're required to provide special education preschool, and so the idea of a curriculum and adoption may not actually, if every child has an individualized education plan, something that would rise to the level of a required adoption for all students across that set might not be triggered. Are we in charge of the curriculum that is used within the Seattle preschool programs or the Head Start programs? Because again, those may have separate curriculum adoption protocol.
That's a question.
But I don't think, because once you start saying that we're going to adopt preschool curriculum and it's then mandated to be used across all of our preschools, we may end up with some conflicts.
I think
ahead,
that's a really good point. Actually, if I wish the staff member who is
Cashel.
Cashel, thank you, that's deepest in on preschool. Many years ago, I sat on the original task force for the city's preschool program, and I remember the conversations at that time was about the suggestion that they had 3 curriculum that were possible to be used. So it's an interesting question as to whether or not, if we in the district decide we're using one of those 3, or how that's done. And I think it deserves an answer for us to figure out whether or not that should actually fall under our policy, or if it doesn't. And I agree with you on the special ed thing, but I'd like to get clarity.
I think it would be just an interesting conversation, because I think we are a provider of preschool with city money, and not necessarily, I mean, I don't know if we've adopted a pre-K-12 model in this district yet, or if we're still K-12, so we can have that conversation.
That's also a quick amendment.
Yes.
Because that conversation may need more input than our current timetable affords, but that's a quick amendment.
Okay, I believe I'm last up here. Certainly heard a lot about ethnic studies recently, and I think it is a priority of everybody on this dais, and I'd like to channel our missing board member, Director DeWolf, as well. And we've got one manager, And how can one manager address all these things? And the second issue is the pushback, loud, not well-framed conversation about the ethnic studies math that has hit the press. Can you talk about that a little bit? Because I don't think that it is framed in an appropriate way. And I guess I'd like to know where we're going on ethnic studies and when we're going to get there. And that does relate to this.
Yes, and I will attempt to answer most of what you ask. With the audio that came out, I believe, today around ethnic studies and math that was on KIRO. I talked to the program manager of ethnic studies, Tracy Gill, about that and asked her where that came from, where that all generated from. As you know, OSPI has established a committee, a statewide committee, to work on ethnic studies curriculum, a K through 12 curriculum. When they were setting up that committee and trying to make their decisions on who was going to be on that committee, having to attend to everything that was within the bill, so geographic locations that represented the state, diversity of the people on there, different groups that were represented, whether it was WEA or other groups. They asked Tracy for some information because Seattle is the leader in terms of ethnic studies in the state. So they asked Tracy, we know you've done a lot of work. Can you give us a couple examples of what you've done so that at least our committee has a chance to look at those? Tracy very graciously provided them with an example in math and an example in another content area. I'm not sure which one. And remember that we are using right now, or we're using a model that pushes in to a curriculum. So ethnic studies coming in to a math assignment. That was the one that they picked up on, and we call that a framework, our framework of how we're going to do that. And so it needs a bit of explaining because if you heard the audio, it was, if you don't have the background behind it or even what's coming next, it makes very little sense. So we are prepared, our comps team is prepared to respond to that if necessary, of course, with Tracy's guidance. So that's on that one.
It's not of if necessary, but it is push back.
Yeah. On the future of ethnic studies.
And the timeline and the pace.
Much depends on how quickly we can get 2015 done. So let's assuming the very best, and that in 2 weeks we have answered all your questions, you're satisfied with that, and we get at least 4 votes to say that 2015 is ready to go. As soon as that is ready to go, we are ready to start working on how we bring you a bar on the adoption of an ethnic studies curriculum. So now, if you think back to what you did in science, it took, what, a year to get that done, to do it? We do not anticipate a year to get that done. We have been working on this for a year and even more so. But what we'll have to do is we'll have to start putting together, we'll have to go through the same process. We have to have an IMC that looks at it. We have to have the adoption committee. Now, all of that can be abbreviated some because we're very far ahead in this process. But we'll bring you a bar that has a fiscal note that shows you what the scope and sequence is, what the curriculum is. Are we using a push-in model? Are we doing a standalone course? Are we doing a hybrid of all of those?
Director Pinkham.
Actually, I just have an amendment to my comments that I gave earlier, so once this is over, if I can make an amendment to my comments, I appreciate it.
Director Burke and then Director Pinkham.
I just wanted to come back to the 4110 conversation around, if you could explain kind of the justification around how this is not an oversight or advisory committee or whatever, so therefore that doesn't apply.
I'll speak to it with what I know, and then I'll ask General Counsel Garber to add any information. When we were looking at the revising, we were looking at everything that's tagged on to 2015, and 4110 had originally been there. But as we were really dissecting that and thinking back to how those colors that, that Kyle had all put together and everything, and we said, does 4110 actually apply to this policy? When we looked deeply into 4110, 4110 governs family and community committees, and we did not believe, our legal team did not believe, that the IMC was a family or community committee. And that is all I can speak to that at this point. I'll have to rely on our counsel.
Again, Greg Narver, Chief Legal Counsel. The specific analysis on this was done by Ronald Boy, one of the lawyers in our department. He's the one most knowledgeable on that. It was his recommendation looking into it that 4110 didn't apply here. As I understand it, the concern was that with the IMC and the adoption committee, you have requirements about their composition and the degree of community involvement and engagement that are set in the case of the IMC by state law, in the case of the adoption committee by other policies here. Nothing about it precludes call it the spirit behind 4110 of being involved, but that whatever specifics you're going to have on these committees ought to be in this policy itself, rather than, he felt, creating confusion by also basically cross-referencing a separate policy. Are you creating a new set of obligations? And I think the concern was really one about clarity of how these committees were going to be comprised, as I understand it. I'd be happy to get further feedback from Mr. Boy, who's the one who took the lead on this issue. But that's my understanding of what his concerns were.
Are you good?
I think my number one concern is just that we have a methodology that's captured in policy or procedure or both around what the transparency of the IMC looks like to the public, because that was one of the places that I think we were called out for in previous conversations.
And I think what he would say, and I invite him, of course, to later weigh in, is that transparency can be
At home
written-
watching, don't you know?
Of course, I'm sure he is. That transparency can be written into this policy itself, so that this is a standalone policy on those requirements rather than creating a cross-reference to a separate policy. It's not to negate the importance of that transparency, but rather it ought to be self-contained within this policy.
Okay, that would be great if we could get the guidance on that. And then also some clarity around this is policy. Presumably we need a procedure to accompany before we can do ethnic studies and kind of the juxtaposition of where those things live.
Okay, we'll be happy to follow up.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah, I mean, actually, back to the 4110 conversation, our policy is really short on the procedure is a little more specific and breaks out the definitions of what's a task force and what's an advisory committee and what they're supposed to do, et cetera. The policy is pretty blankety that we want engagement. This is how we engage, and we want to make sure that families and community have opportunity to participate, and in specific that our process for selecting members must be inclusive, fair, consistent, and transparent. The other sentence that's in here that I think is really important for our work across the district and all of our task forces and the IMC, if there is parent or teacher, because there are positions that are parent and the result must demonstrate equity as committee members should reflect the diversity of our students and families.
I'm sorry, are you quoting from?
I'm quoting from 4110 here.
Okay.
It says it must demonstrate equity as committee members should reflect the diversity of our students and families. And those two things about the selection process, that be transparent, consistent, inclusive, and fair, and that the members reflect the diversity of our students and families. I think those are important points. beyond the transparency of having the minutes and so forth. I agree with Director Burke's point there, but part of the reason why I felt like tying back to 4110 closed some of those loops was clarifying that we, from a policy perspective, believe strongly in this inclusive, fair, consistent, and transparent, as well as reflecting the diversity of our students and families. Those are 2 points that are very clear here, and if we don't have those in the document elsewhere, they get lost. So I would still advocate for tying back to 4110 and making some sort of reference as, that the makeup is different, but that it shouldn't supersede.
Okay, certainly that language can certainly be, whether it's a specific reference to 4110 or just that language from 4110 also being reflected in the policy. The superintendent procedure that goes with 4110 does say that it doesn't apply to committees or groups established under other board policies. So if we are going to do that, there would probably need to be some amending of that as well. But this is something that can, I think, be worked out with language going into the policy.
Director Pinkham.
There's a solution here.
Excuse me, Superintendent Juneau, please.
Pinkham wants to close up. I'm wondering if there could be a reference to 4110 in this policy, and then in the procedure make clear what an IMC is specifically. So, because there's different categories of task force and meetings, and maybe the words in the procedure should outline what the IMC is. Okay.
Okay. And there's also, of course, the state statute on the IMC that gets factored in as well.
Director Pinkham, you have last word, kind sir.
Oh, wow, this is the pressure's on. But my comment that I wanted to share earlier during our board comments was that maybe other parents out there are getting confused when they get a call saying that your son or daughter's been marked absent for the following periods, and it says 13 or 14, and what is 13th and 14th period? So we need clarification on that for parents out there. I confused there to find out what those actually periods are. Depending upon block schedules, the school didn't know either. Oh, we don't know how it works, and so we need some clarification there, please.
And on that note, this meeting is adjourned at 7:43.